Stringfellow, kind of bit of a Cockney white boy gangster kind of person. I think those kind of people are the royalty. They're kind of vicious, treacherous, duplicitous, murderous.
But Trump, who's like got a well documented background with the mafia ties and all that kind of stuff. Anyway.
Yeah. Exactly. So it's not, things haven't really changed that much.
So yeah, we were going to tackle 5 popular myths about the royals and debunk them. Here are the 5, and just let me know if there are any others. But number 1, they provide continuity and stability. Actually, I've got some quotes from like a royalist arguing for the royal family. They said monarchy provides continuity and stability. It's apolitical, so preferable to partisan presidential politics, and guarantees national identity. So that's kind of number 1 and 2. That it provides stability and it's apolitical. Number 3, and I quote: the royals provide glamour and pageantry, entertainment value, and are popular. So that's number 3. Number 4, they're cost effective because they bring in tourists. Again, a lovely little quote there. And number 5, they do valuable diplomatic and charity work. So these are basically the 5 reasons I found that we should support royalty, and so I thought we could debunk them. And like we were saying before, we don't really need to debunk them to deny that monarchy is it's a bad way to have a political system. The hereditary principle is about as opposite as you can get to democracy. So, so we could stop there and say, right, we've won the argument. We don't need to carry on. But people do say this rubbish, so I think it's worth debunking. And later we're going to talk about some individual royals, because I've had these arguments with people who call themselves Republicans. So we're gonna deal with some of the mythology around the individual royals, because they get so much billions of dollars worth of free PR from the media. So and the amount of people that call themselves Republicans yet will defend the Queen just amazes me.
It's like the old socialist Harold Wilson. He was called himself a socialist, but he absolutely loved the monarchy. Had the Queen round for dinner, I think, at Downing Street. So that just shows you, doesn't it, the control and the effects and the power that they have over people.
I mean, Labour have always loved the Queen, but another good example is Jeremy Corbyn, who somehow has this reputation for wanting to abolish the monarchy. He said categorically that Labour will not abolish the monarchy. I found a quote in the Express, and bear in mind that the Express is obsessed with portraying Corbyn as a communist, he's an IRA sympathiser, all this kind of absolute nonsense. And through gritted teeth, they admitted that Corbyn, in quotation marks, is a fan of the Queen. So I'm inclined to believe that that's a real, he's really said that. I couldn't find the original quote where he said, "I'm a fan of the Queen." But I'm inclined to believe, it's not something they would admit otherwise. He's a member of her Privy Council, so he's like one of her personal advisors. It's a bit of a contradiction to say that he's some kind of Republican when he's...
Yeah. It also, I think that really interesting what you say. It's also interesting in that it shows how embedded Parliament, the system of Parliament, is within the monarchy. Because all of these MPs, and I mean, I think even to sit in Parliament, I think you have to swear an oath to the Queen.
Oh, you certainly used. It used to be a very serious thing, and there was a case in Canada just in recent years, a couple of years ago, where a local council refused to swear allegiance to the Queen.
I remember that.
He's Indigenous, by the way. So he's supposed to swear allegiance to some foreign despot.
Yeah, I heard about that.
Queen Elizabeth, who's got nothing to do, shouldn't have anything to do with Canada. It's stolen land, and he wasn't allowed to. He was disbarred or whatever from being.
Yeah, I read about that.
So,
I mean, that just proves, doesn't it, that it's not apolitical at all. It's
yeah,
basically embedded within politics. I think that's one of the reasons it's so hard to have a debate about it or try and get rid of it. It's just embedded within the system.
I think that the word is embodies. The Queen embodies the British system. So she personally is the head of the armed forces. She personally is the head of our justice system, so-called justice system. We'll get onto some of these things a bit later in a bit more detail. But,
I did find something out that's really funny though. Apparently, the Queen can never be guilty of a crime.
Yeah, that's true.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So she's like James Bond. She's got a license to kill.
License to kill. You can never be guilty, which is interesting. Yeah.
Which just makes an absolute mockery of any idea that Britain is democratic or anything like that. You've got this person that is legally, she can do no wrong. She could literally, I mean, in reality, there'd probably be quite a big scandal if she, I don't know,
kill Prince Andrew.
Stabbed Prince Philip in the eye at dinner or something. I don't know, but just got sick of him. But yeah, in legal terms, what could anyone do? It'd be interesting. No doubt she's she's up behind the scenes. I'm sure up to all kinds of nefarious deeds. But so there's this idea that the monarchy provides continuity and stability, and it guarantees our national identity. First question you've got to ask to that is continuity and stability for who? It's all very well saying that, but it's not stability for a class of billionaires and millionaires, living the high life, isn't much good to the rest of us.
Yeah, no, that's very true. And also stability, I mean, sorry to butt in, but I mean, stability is only good depending on what the system is that you're keeping stable, surely, right? So,
exactly.
Hitler achieved stability in Germany for a few years, but we're never going to argue that Hitler is good because he achieved stability.
Exactly.
So it's a complete mishmash of concepts, isn't it?
Right. You know this Godwin's law thing.
Oh, I know. Sorry, I had to.
No. I can't stand that. Like, we're talking about the British royal family. Of course, we're going to compare them to the Nazis. and actually, it's the wrong way around, isn't it?
Yeah, that's true.
Because it's the Nazis that emulated the British ruling class. It's the Nazis that emulated British concentration camps.
Yeah.
The way they wiped out people, they thought that was fantastic. British and American eugenics programs. They thought they were pretty cool and copied them. So so that idea about continuity and stability, that's debunked pretty quickly.
Yeah. What was the other one?
The next one is that they're apolitical and symbolic, and we've touched on this. Yeah, and again, this is something I've heard from so-called Republicans. Yes, but the monarchy is only symbolic. She doesn't have any real power. So first of all, if that's true, let's just have an elected figurehead. I mean, it's still not an argument for monarchy, is it? That she's apparently got no power, according to some people. It's not true. She does have enormous power, and we'll get onto that in more detail in a second. Yeah, like it's not a good argument. And okay, and they say, you don't want all this presidential politics, partisan, and all this kind of stuff. Look, anything's better than this unelected like they say, symbolic. What is it a symbol of? It's a symbol of these steep hierarchies that are based in centuries-old beliefs in divine right and blue blood, magic blood. We've got special DNA. These kind of ideas that. They're not symbolic of good things. They're symbolic of things we want to actually do away with.
Get rid of. Yeah. No, for sure. I mean, and the whole power thing, I mean, like you say, I mean, it's a bit ridiculous. I mean, like, we all know that behind the scenes, for example, Charles, he's known for lobbying ministers behind the scenes. At the moment, I think that there's a big controversy, isn't there, about his letters being covered up. Because I think if they come out, it'll show how much he interferes in politics, and how much he does meddle behind the scenes, and all this stuff like requesting private audiences with ministers and trying to sway policy on areas that he's interested in. I mean, even if it's just on areas that he's interested in, like the environment, for example, it's still power. You know, he's got this immense power to basically affect policy, you know.
Yeah, I got some examples. So, like, some of these letters did come out, and they call them the Black Spider memos.
That's it, yeah.
The Guardian had to fight a 10-year legal battle to get them out. And after they came out, they changed the law so that the royal family, the monarchy, now has total immunity from freedom of information requests. So we'll never know that stuff again. Like, this is, you know. What they found were things like, basically, constantly demanding private meetings with cabinet ministers. And the Prime Minister. He was receiving cabinet memos for decades. And what it allowed him to do is basically, he'd find out what's going on as it's happening, and he could go and intercept ministers before they even, get to Parliament. So he's allowed to lobby legally, but in that role, he's got this inordinate amount of information.
And power as well, surely.
Yeah, massive advantage over, sort of ordinary legal lobbyists. And like you say about the environment, like, he's got some real daft ideas. You know, it's not like he's lobbying good stuff. Actually, I've got some examples. So this was under the Blair regime. So he made persistent demands of Blair and his ministers. Demands included better equipment for imperialist troops destroying Iraq, availability of unproven medicines in healthcare, demand for a badger, demand for a lift to the ban on fox hunting.
I remember that.
Which he described as romantic, genuinely environmentally friendly, natural, and suggested that those seeking to ban it were motivated by class war.
Interesting.
We wouldn't want that now, would we?
No. It's interesting because, like, the whole idea of fox hunting, like, if you could symbolise the royal family in, like, one ritual, I think it would be something like fox hunting, wouldn't it? Because it's so cruel, it's so pointless, and it's just about posh people having a jolly, killing something for fun. And it's like, that just sums up their whole attitude to life. So it's interesting he talks about class war. I mean, class war goes two ways, obviously, doesn't it? But at least he knows that there is a class war, you know.
They know big time. You know, they know a lot better than most. So also, a lot of people don't know that the Queen has all these formal powers that she basically devolves to ministers. So, and this is why people always go, oh, well, it's only symbolic because these are powers invested in her, but other people carry them out. You know.
So is that like the ability to dissolve Parliament? Has that been?
She no longer has that power, actually. But it used to be. I think 2011 that changed, but
that got changed, didn't it?
That got changed. We've got fixed term parliaments now, but things like that. So like the power to declare war, make treaties, stuff like that. So, but she does have real power. She must give consent. So the formal powers that people tend to know about, they're called, and she gives royal assent to those. That's the kind of more symbolic part. And it's worth pointing out, in a time of, in quotes, grave constitutional crisis, those powers do become more real. Those latent powers kind of do materialize. And it's not clear what anyone means by grave constitutional crisis. So in those times, she's allowed to act contrary to or without ministerial advice. So there is room there for the Queen or the monarch. The Queen's not got too long left, but the monarch to genuinely take those powers again. But she and Charles have to give consent to any law being debated in Parliament which affects the monarchy's interests, and in particular,
I heard about that.
The duchies that they still own. And she's exercised this on 39 occasions. So, including, she vetoed a private member's bill that sought to transfer the power to authorise military strikes against Iraq from the monarch to Parliament. So that's a pretty big deal for the people saying she has no power. There's other things. So Charles has to give consent also for legislation for certain things. So, and together they've been involved in legislation that affects hereditary revenues, personal property, or other interests of his duchy. In recent years, the government has gone begging for his and the Queen's consent on issues such as the London Olympics, higher education, paternity pay, ID cards, and civil partnerships. And you've got to imagine that there's a lot of quid pro quo going on there. If they can veto this kind of stuff, the government might be saying, well, look, you do that for us, we'll do something outside of that remit for you. So that that power will expand.
Yeah, and I think like what you referred to a bit earlier as well is that the kind of power that she has. I mean, it's like you say, in a time of constitutional crisis, certain powers can be unlocked. Like you say, it's not clear what that means. So I think a lot of these powers that she's got, they're not strictly defined or legally defined in any precise way. So there's a lot of manoeuvring for kind of like, like you were saying about how there's all these grey areas where she can kind of influence without influencing and all that kind of stuff. So I think the fact that the kind of legal powers aren't strictly defined is worrying, really, because there's obviously that room for manoeuvre, sliming your way through things,
Yeah.
And I think that's a big part of it.
William also writes to government ministers, by the way, and has expressed frustration with the constraints of his position. So, I heard about that. It's not like they have no ambition. They're upset with their kind of the more backseat role that they've had to take. And then the other thing is about this idea that they're apolitical somehow. Like, she's the head of the armed forces. How is that not political? And they're very militaristic. The whole family, they all get involved. They all get these absurd
definitely
medals all over them. In 2017, she unveiled a memorial to the soldiers that devastated the nations of Iraq and Afghanistan, saying they were honoured with pride. And she claimed they brought peace and stability. I mean, to Iraq and Afghanistan, how can you say that with a straight face?
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting there is that we all now know that Iraq and Afghanistan have been complete disasters. So I think it kind of shows that by her linking herself to that kind of endeavour and at the same time saying it's a good thing, it's almost an opportunity, because the cracks are, there's a little crack there that you can kind of fit into and kind of prise apart a bit almost. The fact that she still sees fit to basically validate those things is
well, I mean, they took part. So like, first of all, they made money out of it because they're a big part of BAE Systems. So they directly made money out of the Iraq War. Harry went to Afghanistan and laughed about killing Afghans. So they're heavily involved in that kind of stuff. So this apolitical thing, you could argue the non-partisan to an extent, because all the parties in Parliament are imperialist and pro-monarchy. So of course, but I mean, they obviously favour the Tories. Yeah. I did hear one thing that I'm not sure. I didn't check to what extent it is true. I read it in a Johan Hari article that the Queen Mother used to toast Margaret Thatcher at the dinner table.
That doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, I mean,
that doesn't surprise me.
Even if she didn't, like,
let's just say she did.
Let's just say she did. Yeah, I mean,
let's just say she did.
They all love the Nazis, so it's not a great stretch of the imagination to say they also quite liked Margaret Thatcher.
Of course, yeah, of course. I mean, really, just to kind of come full circle in a way, I know we're not full through yet, but tying all of this back to what we were saying at the beginning about how basically you've got this, these ruthless gangsters that will do anything to hold on to their power, in these Anglo-Saxon kingdoms where you basically have to murder and kill everybody to get power. I mean, really, I know that's 1,000 years ago, roughly, but in terms of the characteristics that they show now are very similar to those same characteristics that would have made Alfred a good king.
I mean, so I mean that's almost being a bit too complimentary to them. I mean, at least like Alfred the Great, sort of had to have some skill. Like they've just inherited it. They don't have to do anything, and they don't have to be good at anything, and they aren't good at anything.
That's really I was going to mention that. Maybe we can come on to that later, but there's a really interesting thing about how when you look at how incompetent they are as people. I mean, there's
Yeah.
the last 2 generations of the royal family have just been like pond life, basically.
Yeah.
You know, they've just been useless at everything.
Yeah.
Every job they've done, they've messed it up. You know, you've got kind of dodgy sex scandals and under the table dealing. You know, it's really, really, really like a dysfunctional. I'll come back to that later, but yeah, at least Alfred was good at conquering people, I suppose.
Yeah, at least he had some kind of competence. So and also like just we're just on this kind of topic of apolitical, the power and that kind of thing, and it feeds into a greater myth that Britain is a democracy. I mean, it's a whole other topic which we can't really get into, and it's a bit of a hit and run comment to say.
Yeah.
You know, probably most people find that a strange thing to say. Britain is, or most British people probably find it strange to say Britain is not a democracy. We know without extensive justification, which I could give, because we've not got time, but another time. But just a couple of little tidbits about on the day of Kate and William's wedding, a group of people were arrested, 2 properties were raided, and a minor was arrested for carrying 2 pens in his backpack.
I heard about this. Yeah, was this in Windsor?
Yes. Is that where the wedding was? It was near where the wedding was.
So, yeah.
The police just went and arrested a load of people preemptively, like Minority Report style. Just hadn't done anything. They raided 2 properties. They arrested a minor who was carrying 2 pens in his backpack. 2 pens, apparently, is criminal behaviour. And the Metropolitan Police stated that the sole reason for the time of the raids was the royal wedding. When the protesters got to court, they found the police denying the arrests were preemptive, claiming that the arrests were in fact to protect them from a violent response from royalists, which
So some old granny with like a William and Kate poster is going to like attack them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
That's really weird that the police would arrest you for your... Yeah, exactly. It's like protection, isn't it? It's like, I'm going to take you into protective custody for your own benefit, you know? It's like...
I know I'm hogging things a bit, but yeah, I've just got all this material. So maybe going back to the myth about stability and continuity, that kind of thing. Well, it's not really a myth. They do provide continuity and stability for a white supremacist, billionaire, aristocratic ruling class in Britain. That is true.
Yeah.
But, you know, we're questioning why that's a good thing. And to kind of this idea that they provide a kind of some focal point of unity in a very diverse society. This is unbelievable. Like somehow in a multicultural, multi-faith society, having a head of state who's necessarily of a certain race and faith, head of a particular church. It's not like she's just any old Christian. She's head of a very specific church, the Church of England.
Yeah.
You know, it totally compounds the marginalisation of minorities, and to claim that she's some kind of stapling all these different identities together around a kind of it's just you just left, you know, banging your head against a brick wall. And on top of that, well, I'm gonna give quite a few examples of their overt racism. There's a covert racism about the royal family that's inherently white supremacist. But you know, even if they didn't make all these in quotation marks gaffes, media calls them gaffes. Really, they're just like hate speech.
It's just what Philip really thinks, isn't it? It's not you know. Yeah. It's not like it's a joke. It's like he's just saying his opinion.
Yeah.
You know? The
whole institution is based around the fact that this family supposedly sits at the pinnacle of a pyramid of genetic superiority, and their whole existence is predicated on the purity of their blood. They're obsessed with, you know, bloodlines and breeding, and they've got as ancestors, they've got emperors and empresses, and you know, they're actual slave owners, slave traders. So anyway,
so what stage are we up to at the moment?
So
what talking point are we on?
I sort of took us back to continuity and stability to talk about their racism, because you know, the idea that they can provide stability and unity for a multicultural society like Britain is just absurd, and it's especially absurd when you take into account all this kind of stuff that I'm going to talk about, which is right. So clearly slavery, that's quite a big thing. And various groups have written to the Queen and asked for some kind of apology, some kind of acknowledgement. She's pointedly refused. I mean, it would be a charade if she did, if she went through, some kind of apology. It wouldn't mean much anyway. But
Yeah.
If they renounced all their titles and powers and gave the entirety of their wealth away as reparations, then I believe that they're sorry. But they won't. Just the fact that they're not even sorry, they don't give a shit. And the Queen justified her lack of an apology, or her refusal to make an apology, by saying that it wasn't a crime against humanity. So basically, because at the time, it's like saying, well, in the 1930s.
Well, this was probably pre the Yalta Conference, wasn't it, where all of the laws to do with genocide were kind of set up, with the purpose of trying the Nazis, So
yeah,
I mean, the fact that just because you enslave a load of people and kill them before that date doesn't make you innocent.
Yeah,
it's
exactly. Yeah, that's
probably
it.
her argument.
Yeah,
her argument was that it wasn't a crime when I did it.
Yeah. Well, not that she did it personally, but like, for example, she visited Barbados in 1966. She stayed with her cousin, Lord Harewood, on a sugar plantation that had been in the family since 1780. They still have this connection to their past as slavers. It's not the same family, but it's the same institution. Charles II's brother shipped 3,000 Africans to the Caribbean every year, and they were branded with a scorching hot iron, DY, for Duke of York.
Yeah.
I think the way she's phrased this refusal to apologise to me comes across as actually a justification for what happened.
No, definitely, and I'm sure she's being advised to not apologise as well. I mean, I'm sure she's got a team of advisors around, telling her what to say and don't make a wrong step, kind of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, you get similar things in kind of Australia, don't you, and other countries where they've got this history, with the Aboriginals and stuff. Like, I don't think any Australian government has fully tried to apologise for all the Aboriginal tragedies and stuff like that. No one's done it, and I think it's
I think
one of those things.
I think Jacinda Ardern did one in New Zealand. I'm sure she made some kind of apology.
Yeah.
Well, again, she is, excuse the pun, but she's the queen of performative gestures that are totally empty.
Yeah. She kind of makes me think of a kind of female Trudeau in a lot of ways.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Plastic, liberal kind of.
Yeah. Awful.
Says the right thing just to get the
just to look good. Yeah, just to look good. And
but then does blackface on.
I think her dad was a cop, actually. By the way.
Who's that? Sorry.
Jacinda Ardern. I think her dad was a cop.
Oh, really?
They've got higher imprisonment rates of Indigenous people than I think the US does of black people. So I digress. So Charles encountered in Manchester, he encountered a Mancunian woman, Anita Sethi, and she's of Guyanese heritage. And he said, "And where are you from?" "Manchester," she replied. "Well, you don't look like it."
I remember this.
He said,
"I remember this."
And apparently she was, she felt humiliated and very upset by it, as you can imagine.
Yeah, and this is fairly recent, isn't it?
Yeah, in the last few years, yeah.
Like the future king of England, basically, just like racially abusing you, pretty much.
Yeah, the only evidence I have of the Queen making such a comment is David Jason told an anecdote on I think the BBC, and he told it as like a charming anecdote about like, oh, isn't she a bit of a cad? She's got a great sense of humour, the Queen, and the journalist, whoever was presenting it, was kind of responded with, oh, that's a bit cheeky. She was describing to David Jason about an encounter she had with a foreign, and she put, "I thought I was talking to a gorilla." I mean,
that's what she said. Oh my god.
Well, according to David Jason wasn't. He thinks the Queen's great, so he was telling it as a cheeky little story, an example of what a great sense of humour she has. But one of the worst ones. So William gets off lightly. And I think he said one one of the worst things, actually. So he gave a talk at the Tusk Trust a few years ago, and he said, Africa's rapidly growing human population is predicted to more than double by 2050, a staggering increase of 3.5 million people per month. There is no question that this increase puts wildlife and habitat under enormous pressure.
Yeah, I remember this actually. Yeah, I remember this. It kind of reminded me of just, from the other history that I've been doing with students and stuff. Like when the Nazis were trying to plan their conquest of like the East and Russia and Poland and all that, they were talking about, making sure that the population doesn't grow too much because then there's not going to be enough food. So they were kind of talking about sterilizing the natives and moving them into labour camps and stuff. And I know William didn't say that, but the logic of what he's saying is the same, isn't it?
It's the same logic.
An undesirable group of people that should be curbed or minimised. Let's do it.
Yeah,
that's his kind of.
I mean, bear in mind that he's worried about population growth in Africa. He's not worried about. When people talk about population growth in the abstract, actually, it's a dog whistle. You know that they're talking about because I don't think white populations in Europe, North America, Australia, I don't think are they even. They're certainly not growing. At the
they're
same
definitely
rate.
not. They're definitely not among the fastest growing populations.
Yeah.
White population.
Yeah.
I think other populations are acknowledged to be growing faster, especially in the UK.
So it's definitely it's a dog whistle either way.
Yeah,
he wasn't even dog whistling. He was specifically saying Africa has too many people.
Yeah.
And he said urbanization, infrastructure development, cultivation, all good things in themselves, but they will have a terrible impact. Like, oh my God. Like, your family has been the head of an empire which systematically destroyed civilizations in this part of the world, and systematically stifled any kind of development. Botswana, for example, which is where Harry bought Meghan's engagement ring. When it gained independence in 1966, it had just 7 miles of usable roads, and I'm sure I don't know, but I'm sure these roads were like basically a road from the airport to a diamond mine or something like that.
Yeah, to the diamond mine, to the airport, to the plane can pick up stuff, fly out of there. Everything else is just like left to rot away.
And he also gets off lightly, like when Harry, there was a bit of a furore about Harry wearing a Nazi uniform to a party.
Yeah.
William also went to that party, and the theme of the party, he didn't wear a Nazi uniform, but the theme of the party was colonials and natives.
Oh my God, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so and he went to that. I think he went dressed up in a leopard skin outfit or something. I don't know, but
I would have thought he'd go as Cecil Rhodes or someone like that.
Yeah, but just go into a party like that and I feel like out of all of them, the Queen and William, even Republicans will defend them, and for me,
that's
the
true.
worst. And another point about focusing on Africa is, if you look at population density, Google a map of world population density. Africa does not have a population density problem.
No. It's kind of someone was telling me it's places like Manhattan and those sort of places that have got dense populations, right?
Yeah.
Like Western rich developed countries have got all dense populations. It's not.
I think the Netherlands is one of the most densely populated countries in the world. If you look at the population density map, Western Europe is covered in the dark colour.
Well, that's the argument, I think, isn't it? Is that we've got a population or a perceived population density problem. So rather than looking at our own problem, what we'll do, we'll go to Africa and liquidate Africa a bit more. Kill off a few more million Africans, and then the overall population of the world will drop, and then problem solved. We don't have to fix our own problems. We can just go and kill other people. So I think that's where he's going with it. I think
it absolutely is. And also, Prince Philip was asked what he'd like to come back as. He said he'd like to come back as a virus and wipe everyone out. I'm pretty sure I'd know who he'd want to wipe out as well. Yeah, sorry, you're going to say something.
No, not at all. I just totally forgot that. I totally forgot that you made that comment.
We've got to get onto the Nazism, because this...
Oh, definitely. You know,
Right.
to be fair, I should have started with the Nazis, not with Alfred the Great. I should have just started with Hitler and all that. You know, 'cause that's the best place to start. But then people might turn the podcast off. You never know.
Big fan of Hitler. They loved him.
Yeah.
So there was a scandal about that picture came out of Queen Elizabeth as a child being taught to Nazi salute to do the. I remember speaking to someone who is far from a royalist, and he was like, you know, they didn't know what the Nazis were like back then, right? So they've been saying they were going to do this. Like Hitler wrote Mein Kampf in what 1925?
Yeah, it was before the. Yeah, it was before the 30s. It was way before the 30s because
it was when he was in
the 30s. Is when. Yeah, he's in prison. He was in prison. He had no political power at all, and you know that was way before the 30s. And everyone talks about the 30s, but you know, like you say, it was there. All the ideas were there in the you know in the 20s. Really, it was all there.
They were saying this stuff from the start, from when they first started. I think was it 1922, something like that.
Yeah,
but like,
it was a very well. It's a big selling book as well, Mein Kampf. You know, everyone will have. With it.
Yeah, it was no secret what the Nazis were around. I mean, there was you know there was distortions and so on. But so when she was doing this Nazi salute, I think that was the late 30s.
Yeah.
They'd already had the Nuremberg laws in place.
Sure, Kristallnacht would already have happened. Smashing up Jewish homes and properties, that would have happened. The eugenics program and the sterilisation up as well. Yeah,
they weren't allowed to marry true Germans, were they?
That would have all happened. I mean, I think you probably would have even had the people wearing the yellow stars of David in the streets. I think that definitely would have already happened. So, like you say, it's obvious. It's obvious what his game was. You know.
And they say, oh well, she was just a child then. What has she actually done in her life? In what way has she renounced this? You know, she's spent her whole life married to Prince Philip, who and okay, you could say, oh well, you can't judge her based on husband. You can to an extent if your husband's a Nazi. You know, you can, some of that's you got to take responsibility.
Some of that's going to rub off.
Some of that's going to rub off, isn't it?
At dinner, when you're chatting and stuff, some of it's going to rub off.
Even as late as 2000. So, I mean, Philip's constantly making these racist comments, which maybe I can read out a few later. But in 2006, he said that his family found Hitler's early attempts to restore Germany's power and prestige attractive. There was a great improvement in things like trains running on time and building. There was a sense of hope. You can understand how attractive it was. So this is Philip basically saying how they'll. And bear in mind that 3 of his sisters married high-ranking Nazis, and he went to their weddings and one of their funerals. They had a big funeral where there's a picture of Philip walking with the funeral cortege for his older sister, and alongside him they're all in Nazi uniform, brown shirts, SS regalia. Loads of people in the crowd are doing the Nazi salute, and another of his sisters had dinner with Hitler at the wedding of Goering. One of his sisters described Hitler as a charming and seemingly modest man. She gave her first son the middle name Adolf in honor of Hitler. So she was impressed by Hitler's plans to change and improve the situation in Germany. So this idea that they didn't know what was going on, they have family, and everybody knows about Edward, who had to abdicate. Everyone knows that surely everyone knows that, I think, that him and his wife were Nazis. So he abdicated in favour of George VI, but George VI people know from the film The King's Speech, he was a Nazi as well. He was good friends with his cousin, the Duke of Coburg, who was with Hitler from the start, from the 1920s. He helped Hitler get into power, and he'd visit King George. He'd visited the family quite often. One German diplomat reported King George VI will not forget the attitude of the German press if he remains on the throne. The German attitude will be useful since he has great sympathies for the Third Reich. And the Duke of Coburg stayed with them at Sandringham. He was an Obergruppenführer in the party. So people like Duke of Coburg, Philip's sisters, they facilitated a major network of connections between the British aristocracy and the German aristocracy.
I mean, I think we kind of covered most of it. I mean,
on a tour with his American wife.
Oh yeah.
Wallace Simpson, and actually performed Nazi salutes. You know, while they were there, they actually visited concentration camps as well. And,
that was David, wasn't it? David,
Edward.
Prince of Wales. Edward. Okay.
Yeah, the king's brother.
Right.
The one who abdicated.
Yeah. Is his real name David though? I'm pretty sure his real
name.
Is it?
Yeah, because they take a different. They take a regnal name, don't they? You probably right.
It doesn't matter. Yeah, it's the same. It's the same person.
I didn't know that.
It's the same person. No. Well, I've been watching The Crown. That's the only reason I know.
Right. Anyway, never mind. So yeah, just people tend to know these couple of things. What they don't know the extent of it, and the fact is the whole family was up to the neck in it, and everyone from King George VI's parents were sympathetic to the Nazis. They all supported what we know as appeasement, which is associated with the Chamberlain, Neville Chamberlain.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a whole nother myth, appeasement, like we could get into, but we won't. But like, I mean, really, it was a collaboration. They were helping the Nazis grab land in Eastern Europe, goading them on to the threat of communism. So a lot of the British aristocracy have got family amongst the German aristocracy, and the French and across Europe.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, it's changed. I think it's changed a bit now, but back then certainly, they wouldn't deign to marry what they would call a commoner. They'd marry aristocracy from across Europe if they couldn't marry within the British aristocracy. Right, so Queen Mother, again, big fan of Adolf Hitler. Also support. So this is King George VI's wife and Queen Elizabeth's mother, and she once admitted that she had reservations about the Jews in quotation marks. She supported the white supremacist regimes in Rhodesia and South Africa. A journalist who knew her, Paul Callan, admitted rather euphemistically she is not fond of black folk. And the Royal Diarist backs this up as well, Sir Roy Strong. He admitted that he hid the Queen Mother's racism because it was too awful, again, quotation marks. Yeah. And he said during a lunch once, she leant over and said, "Beware the blackamoors." What? I don't know the context of that. Beware the blackamoors. I have no idea the context of that, or if it was just apropos of nothing. But and she admired like P.W. Botha, leader of apartheid South Africa, who locked up Mandela. And again, according to Johan Hari, she would toast Margaret Thatcher at the supposedly apolitical royal dinner table. So and then even with Edward, who I think most people know was a Nazi, that I still don't think they realise the extent of it, and that like his Nazi. So I think a lot of the royal family reached a bit of a point with Nazism where it was, they had to choose one side or the other. Britain's at war with Germany. One historian I read said that this point came in 1941. When the phony war ends, when the Blitz started, and they realised, we're actually, we're at war with these people that we otherwise agree with, but Edward continued to be a supporter of the Nazis and his wife to the extent where they were in regular contact with Ribbentrop, the Nazi foreign minister, and apparently leaked secrets. If Germany had beaten Britain, Edward was prepared to come back as leader. Yeah, definitely. And the royal biographer Andrew Morton said that even after the war, Edward thought Hitler was a good fellow and that he'd done a good job in Germany. And Edward was also anti-Semitic before, during, and after the war. So, you've got the Queen who she's just like Teflon, isn't she? I mean, she's taught Nazi salutes as a kid. She's got Nazi parents, Nazi uncle and auntie, Nazi grandparents, cousins, a husband. Her 3 sisters-in-law are married to high-ranking Nazis, and somehow she comes out of it smelling of roses. And you got Philip constantly coming out with this stuff. He's even in 2006, he's still engaged in massive historical revisionism about the Nazis, saying that they were provided a sense of hope and all this kind of thing. Made the trains run on time, as if the royal family would give a shit about trains running on time.
Yeah.
We don't have like hard, concrete things to sort of hit her with, but just all this is going on around her. I mean, it'd be a miracle if she was somehow an oasis of, you know, tolerance and progressivism. Apparently, she's made comments about to friends about, or comments have been leaked that she opposes gay marriage. I mean, you know, that wouldn't surprise too many people, I'm sure. There's that anecdote about calling a foreign diplomat a gorilla. Or describing him as a gorilla, not calling it to his face. But and then the apples haven't fallen far from the tree with Harry and William and Charles. Harry dressing up in a Nazi uniform, and William going to this native and colonial theme. I think the most damning thing about the Queen is her attitude to slavery, where she thinks it wasn't a crime against humanity and refuses to apologise in any way. Genuine reparations would wipe her out. As rich as she is, as rich as the family is,
yeah,
the reparations that they owe would take every single penny from them. Oh, and right, there's one more, and that is Princess Michael of Kent.
Who's she?
So she's the Queen.
She married to somebody, or?
Yeah, she's the Queen's cousin's wife, and her father was actually an SS officer.
Okay, yeah.
She defended Harry's Nazi costume. So when Harry married Meghan Markle, who's I think great grandfather was actually a slave himself. She arrived at an event attended by Meghan Markle wearing a blackamoor brooch, which is known,
I remember this.
which is known to fetishize slavery.
Yeah.
And her excuse was like, "Oh well, I didn't know." It's like, what, you've got all this different, you know, she'll have a massive jewelry collection. She picked out this one piece that there'd already been a public uproar about it because it had been included in Dolce & Gabbana collections, and there'd already been a bit of a furore about it. So the idea that she didn't know what it meant is nonsense.
She was born in Nazi Germany, apparently. Yeah,
apparently she once told a group of black diners, presumably at a restaurant, to, I quote, "go back to the colonies." She's commented, "Most of the English believe the wogs begin at Calais." And then, right, this is just weird. This is so... Right, I'm quoting now. She pretended years ago to be an African, a half-caste African, but because of my light eyes, I did not get away with it. But I dyed my hair black. I travelled on African buses. I wanted to be a writer. I wanted experiences from Cape Town to write up in northern Mozambique. I had this adventure with these absolutely adorable special people, and to call me racist, it's a knife through the heart because I really love these people. Totally plausible and believable.
That's kind of like, you know, the kind of Prince Andrew style apology where you apologise, but you just give away how racist you are in the apology.
Yeah.
The apology just makes you look worse.
Yeah.
And you just know, the fact she doesn't have the self-awareness to know that she's like basically digging herself a bigger and bigger hole. It's a very royal thing. I think that's all of the royals seem to do that very well.
And just everything they do, they never face any consequences whatsoever. Like Prince Andrew, he's had to quit. I mean, like years after we actually knew about this. So, you know, it's very obvious that he's only had to quit his official position. People, you know, the people he's surrounded by knew about this years ago, and there was, sure. That they defended him, and his mother defended him. Now there's an uproar about it. The worst that's happened is he's had to quit a job, basically going off to various countries and
pretty much,
you know, royal families of the Middle East.
Yeah, so it's a kind of consequence-free life. I mean, I can't think of a single royal who has ever been properly called to account. I mean, obviously, like Edward, the Nazi sympathiser. I mean, he's like, it's interesting how they treated him, because he was like a kind of pariah within the family. So I think he kind of like actually he was kind of like a scapegoat for a lot of this Nazi kind of association. I think they kind of projected it onto him, and basically, rejected him and kicked him out the country basically, and he's in exile. He was in exile in France, wasn't he, for most of his life?
Was it not? Didn't they move him to, like? Wasn't he in Portugal? And then Churchill got wind of these treasonous talks he was having with the Nazis and moved him somewhere, maybe to the Caribbean or somewhere like that.
I think that was earlier. Yeah, that's true.
Anyone else gets executed? It's treasonous talks during wartime.
Dude, yeah. I think the idea was
he just gets moved to the.
If you move him far away,
yeah.
If you move him as far as Barbados, you can't really cause any damage. In Portugal, he's kind of in Europe, so he can cause more damage there. So I was kind of thinking, get him in the Caribbean or whatever, where he can't really do much, and But yeah, you're right. It's treason. He should have been held to account for that for sure. But then after the war, I know he was exiled, wasn't he?
Normally, I'm quite in favour of treason, but in this case, it's like, who's worse? All right, tell us about Prince Andrew then, because you watched this interview, didn't you? And there's been some other stuff recently as well, hasn't there?
Yeah. I mean, trying to link it into what we're talking about, I suppose. I mean, because I don't want to just rant about Prince Andrew. I want to link it into what we're saying. But yeah. I mean, I think the interview he gave was like, basically in his mind, he thought he was clearing the air and basically making everyone realise that he's just in the wrong place at the wrong time. He didn't do anything wrong. He's a stand-up guy. He works hard. Butter wouldn't melt in his mouth, kind of stuff. That's what I think he thought he was doing. What he actually did do was basically just an absolute, car crash interview where he didn't apologise for anything. He didn't apologise for staying in, the house of a sex offender. I mean, he did apologise, but it was kind of like one of these very kind of like weak apologies where, in hindsight, I apologise, but at the time it was fine, kind of thing. And he didn't once actually mention any of the victims of the scandal. So I would have thought he'd have come on going, "Oh, it's terrible about these young girls. It's terrible." He didn't mention them once. It was all about him. It was basically all about him and his friendship. And they actually said to him, in hindsight, do you regret meeting Epstein? And he said, no, because I got a lot of good business contacts out of it. So he actually said that. So he's basically saying, I don't regret meeting a paedophile because I met a few good people through him. So, every cloud has a silver lining. That's basically what he said. And it's like, obviously I won't go through the whole interview. The whole interview is just full of stuff like that. And then all of the weird lies that he's come out with, like he says that like there was that woman, that 17-year-old at the time, who said that they danced at a tramp nightclub in London, and he was very sweaty. And basically, she just gave a story about him saying that he was very sweaty on the dance floor. And then in the interview, he says that he can't sweat. He's like physically incapable of sweating. So it's just stuff like that. The interview is full of stuff like that.
The worst thing about that is, for sure, 100%, he's got a PR team that prepped him for that interview. And they'll have prepped him for all these questions, and I'm sure they're very expensive. Like, did he just come up with that, or was he prepped?
Well, this is the thing, because normally it is all done by a PR team, and it is kind of very carefully prepared, isn't it? But with this, it was almost like he wrote his own speech. It was that bad. But if it was a PR team, then it's awful. Because you can tell normally with these things that, they give very kind of scripted answers, don't they, to a lot of these questions. But some of the stuff he was saying, it was so ridiculous that I don't even know a PR team could possibly come up with that, I suppose. But it was just really odd. It was a really odd interview. Watch it, if you're interested, you should watch it.
I just can't.
It's cringeworthy.
I just can't bring myself to do it.
It's really cringeworthy. And then at the end of the interview, he actually took the reporter around the palace and thanked her for the interview. Basically said to her, "Thanks so much for doing this." So he thought it had gone well.
This is how out of touch these people are. And I was listening to BBC Radio a few days after, and they were having a debate about. They were having phone-ins. They had. I can't remember who the people were. They sounded very posh. There was about 3 different people that were all giving their opinions. And the opinions ranged from, he shouldn't have given the interview because it made him look worse. Because that's our priority, is like making him look there was one of them that was bringing up the victims, and
Yeah,
one of them suggested he, to sort of do penance, he could do some work with the kind of charities that help victims.
Oh my God!
I mean, Jesus, how
that's like Jimmy Savile working with like the RSPCC, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's like, it's just unbelievable.
I think. Do you know what? I think Prince Andrew might well be, or might well have been a patron of one of the children's charities.
Yeah.
So the range of debate, it was just sickening, and it was just low key apologism for sex trafficking, rape, paedophilia, and all they were concerned about was the image of the royal family and how it was damaged and how that's bad, rather than like, oh, good, so a bit of truth is coming to light, and people are sort of waking up a bit. It was really sickening. So, like, Prince Andrew's extremely good friends with Jeffrey Epstein for two decades. There are flight logs of a 17-year-old girl who had been groomed as a sex slave since she was 15 for Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah.
So there's flight logs proving that she took this flight on what's known as Epstein's Lolita Express to...
Was that to his island?
To London. This is to London.
Oh, right.
And then there's a photo of Andrew with his arm around there, sort of really lecherous and...
Yeah. He said actually that it may have been faked. It may not have been his arm. And he also said he also said that he's never been upstairs in that house, so it's probably fake. So that was Epstein's girlfriend's house in Mayfair, I think. And he said he's been to that house like hundreds of times, but he's never been upstairs.
Wasn't it?
He's never been upstairs.
Wasn't it Ghislaine Maxwell? Wasn't it?
Yeah, that's
house?
it. Yeah, Maxwell.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. That's Epstein's girlfriend, isn't it? At the
daughter
time.
Of.
But he's.
I don't know. I don't know if she's his girlfriend. Well, maybe she may have been, but she's more like a procurer of. Yeah.
She's kind of a socialite, isn't she? That moves.
Daughter of Robert Maxwell, the media magnate.
Yeah.
So a few years ago, when it first kicked off, government actually upheld Prince Andrew. David Cameron said he fully supported him. The Queen invested him with the insignia of a Knight Grand Cross of the Royal Victorian Order, which apparently is the highest possible honour for personal service to the Queen. And then an American judge ordered allegations against Prince Andrew struck from the court record.
I remember that. Yeah.
And then recently that did you hear that thing leaked from ABC? One of the news anchors. And she's going mad because she said, I had this story 3 years ago. We wouldn't put it on the air. And I quote, she said, the palace found out that we had her whole allegations about Prince Andrew and threatened us a million different ways. So the Queen, again, further proof that she's not a cuddly old dear. She's not a nice old lady. And then I've got a quote from a friend of Andrew's. This was reported in Vanity Fair, and he said, after Jeffrey was convicted, I phoned Andrew and told him, you cannot have a relationship with Jeffrey. You can't do these things. And he said, stop giving me a hard time. You're such a Puritan.
Okay.
So if you're describing someone a Puritan for advising you not to spend any
not to hang out
more
with
time with a paedophile, and also some of Epstein's employees that swore under oath that Andrew attended Epstein's pool parties. They saw him receiving massages from groups of adolescent girls. There's a lot going on there.
Yeah. Well, I suppose the interesting thing there is like lots of it is interesting, but the interference, obviously, from the palace in like the investigation in another country.
They've just got a stranglehold over the British press because everyone's terrified of not being in the running for honours. So the honour system is a huge thing. And then also there's this guy David McClure who's an investigative journalist, and he tried to find out about their finances, and he just found he was stonewalled at every point, and the only way they allow you in as if you're 100% toadying towards them.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, you can kind of see how they've got closer, you know, the royals have got closer relationships with some journalists, you know, some journalists they kind of work with, some they don't, some media personalities they work with, some they don't. I think that's really interesting as well. Like, what really annoyed me was that thing with Ant and Dec. When Ant and Dec went to, I can't remember which, it might have been Windsor Castle, I can't remember, and basically did this, you know, like this kind of documentary about, I think it was about it might have been about Prince Charles, but Philip was in a lot of it. And it was basically them sucking up to Philip, you know.
Really?
For like 3 hours. Yeah. It's a horrible documentary. I mean, it's called something like Being Royal with Ant and Dec or something. And, you know, and it's a bit, it's really disturbing watching it, because I kind of see them as, you know, kind of quite salt of the earth, cheeky chappies, you know, kind of quite, you know, from humble backgrounds, you know, working class backgrounds, kind of working class lads made good, and it's just horrible. It's like, and it's really weird. It's like, and you kind of think like, there's obviously tactics behind that, because Ant and Dec are so popular, you know. So they've obviously just like got them in because they've got a great audience, you know, a great brand connection or whatever, and they've got them in to do this thing with the royals. It's just really, but at the same time, it's a really bad fit. Like, you don't see those two necessarily as together, so it's a really weird documentary. But anyway, check it out.
You can just imagine like Philip getting back, you know, once he's finished. Like, oh, bloody proles!
yeah.
Disgusted, like washing his hands after he's shook hands with them, and
working class Geordies in his palace.
But he's absolutely disgusted. Well, mind you, having said that, like, you know, Jimmy Savile was a, you know, working class northerner, and they he'd spend Christmas and New Year with him, and
But that is just that says it all, doesn't it?
Right. So okay. So this ties in quite nicely, actually. So first of all, to get honours, you get vetted by MI5, and here's a couple of people that so people like Sir Cyril Smith, Rolf Harris, Stuart Hall, Ted Heath, Peter Morrison, and Jimmy Savile all got knighted. There's also one of Charles's good mates is this Bishop Peter Ball. So the thing again with the knighting is that gives you a lot of protection. So Jimmy Savile said, bear in mind he's been vetted by MI5. He's a very close fan of the royal family, and he said it was a ginormous relief when I got the knighthood because it got me off the hook.
Is that what he said?
Yeah, he said that. So, and then I saw a documentary, and there was a journalist. She was saying how ashamed of herself because she heard all these rumours about him, and she stopped investigating him after he got knighted because she thought, well, they'll have investigated him.
Yeah. True.
She thought, well, they'll have investigated him, so they've obviously found he's actually all right, and there's nothing to these rumours.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually, because that's the whole thing where, like, the royals, by knighting you, they can cover your tracks, can't they? They can basically, you know, remove you from suspicion, or, you know, or at least make the public think that you're legit, you know. So it's a really good tool for basically papering over the cracks.
And then there's also further protection from the police and the courts and the judges. So the police censored a 2009 interview with Jimmy Savile, redacting any mention of the royals. And then one of Prince Harry's former bodyguards was convicted of paedophilia. Okay, judge was explicit that his so he was spared any prison time. He basically got 6 months suspended sentence and 160 hours community service. And the judge said, "You spent a great deal of your life working very hard to protect other soldiers from harm." He's a former soldier, former terrorist in the British Army. Your history is remarkable. Your military record seldom reaches the levels of considerable praise that you have from those who dealt with you. This is utterly out of character. Given your cooperation and other factors, I am prepared to suspend this sentence. So the judge is pretty explicit there. Basically, he's a royal bodyguard, and his service to British imperialism gets him a slap on the wrist for, you know, a heinous, awful, vile crime.
Might as well have knighted him as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, there's one more thing I was going to say actually. Have you seen that thing about BBC and Andrew? Apparently, this has just come out. The BBC are going to edit a Panorama documentary on Epstein. That they're going to edit it and basically take out a load of footage because it could be damaging to Prince Andrew.
Wow.
So that's just consistent with what you're saying about other people, but the BBC stepping in to actually do that is quite big, I think.
And then, so there is a quid pro quo going on here, because as much as the media protect the royal family, the royal family actually also provide protection for the ruling class represented by the media. So it's a distraction, isn't it? It's like, so when Harry and Meghan announced that, their engagement, the BBC dedicated over 50% of its coverage. And at the same time this was happening, the government announced it would be freezing social security for 12 months, which would mean a loss of £315 a year for the average working family. And there was also news that a prominent Tory had criticised Britain's role in the despicable war on Yemen. And the BBC didn't cover either of those things. Yeah, it spent over 50% of its time covering Harry and Meghan have just got engaged. I mean, you know, that took like less than 2 seconds to say. You don't need to say much more than that, do you? So, and then there's also a story about the Thatcher regime. They didn't actually do it, I don't think, but they planned to use news about Prince William, who was a baby, to drown out possible coverage of a CND protest against government nuclear warfare policy. So so you know, that's pretty explicit what's going on there. Manipulating people and distracting them, treating them as idiots, really easily led idiots. Which I think, you know, if you're talking about royalists, I'd probably agree with that description. No, true. You know, going back to what we started with, that they're basically they're the descendants of thugs who were good at being thugs. Gangsters. And it's great to point that out, because the whole thing is based on this idea that they've got special blood, they're somehow genetically more special than the rest of us. You know, that's why when it's your birthday or my birthday, no one really needs to know, and nobody particularly cares. When it's a royal's birthday, for some reason the whole country's got to know about it and celebrate. Like the Queen's celebrating the Queen's birthday. And then you get these ridiculous headlines. Like, I mean, the best one for me was Meghan Markle opens car door. Oh, I saw that. Yeah. But the thing is with that, it's so cringe, isn't it? Because it's that's just not interesting in itself. But also, like, the fact that they're trying to make out that that's like progressive as well. Like, the fact that she opens her own car door. We're meant to kind of like be really impressed by that. That she's kind of like respects equality because she doesn't want a servant to open a car door for her. It's that's the other side to that, which is I think a few months later there was another one. Meghan Markle opens car door again. That was good. I enjoyed that. So just the fact that they report on their birthdays, on their marriages, like no in any other person's life. Yes, a marriage, a wedding is a special event in your life, but it doesn't necessarily, you don't necessarily care too much about a stranger's wedding or birthday. And yet, we're sort of dragged into this real life kind of soap story. Yeah, there was this thing that I did at uni on the church. I know the church is different to a royal family, but there was this thing I did on, it was the Anglican church, and it was the kind of rituals of the Anglican Church, and it was about how it's very important to get the masses into religion, and one of the ways that you do that is through ritual. So a ritual could be going to church, saying grace, going to mass, having, taking Holy Communion, all the rest of it. The idea is that, if you give people a set of rituals that they have to do or follow, then it just becomes part of who they are. And I think, like, with the royal family, this thing about the Queen's birthday and, we celebrate this, we celebrate that, there's all these kind of little kind of gestures that we make, and all these kind of like rituals that we go through. It's a similar thing, It's creating, it's creating these rituals so that when it is the Queen's birthday, we all just go crazy and the BBC melts down for the day. When one of them gets married, we all go crazy. So it is kind of, whoever's behind their PR, I think
really does, usually anyway, not recently, but usually
not
does a
not
very
with
good
Prince
job.
Andrew.
of
That is
grit.
just an impossible job.
No,
But yeah,
no,
no, you're right. You're absolutely right. But like, I think that's a good point, because so many people actually have never questioned it, because it's just so ingrained in our,
Well,
you know,
exactly.
like, and that's the worst thing. Like, you know, the Prince William will visit a primary school, and all the kids are like encouraged to, you know, yeah,
That's a ritual. That's a ritual.
yeah. And I suppose a lot of people have probably simply.
What do they do in American high schools every morning? They stand up and they,
Yeah.
what is it they say? I've forgotten it now. Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance, yeah.
They swear the Pledge of Allegiance
Yeah.
every morning. That's mad.
Yeah.
I mean,
it is.
you know,
It is.
if we saw North Koreans doing that, we'd say they were brainwashed.
Yeah.
So it's just a ritual, isn't it? And I think.
Yeah, it's important to point out there's a big difference. And right, this is a good point actually, because often gets compared to North Korea, and there's a massive difference there between North Korea, which again, that's another myth about this. Oh, it's a monarchy. No, it's not a monarchy. Look, you know, we don't really have time to go into that, but actually look at the constitution, look at the political system. It's definitely not a monarchy.
Yeah.
I think we find it very difficult to kind of get why like places like North Korea and other post-colonial countries have this great reverence for certain leaders, and it's because Britain does not have. It's not a post-colonial country. It's the colonizer. I saw a statistic like how many days a year other countries celebrate independence from Britain. I can't remember what it was, but you know, like they've got a good reason to, you know, be positive about their leaders, because it's quite, you know, it's a huge thing that they liberated themselves from first
for sure.
Japanese control, and then you know, the war that was perpetrated by America and Britain. Britain was heavily involved in that, and they absolutely destroyed the country. And they've rebuilt themselves under the harshest possible conditions, the harshest sanctions, and they've rebuilt that country. So you know, it's very different when you see the militarism and things, militarism in North Korea. Well, they're still technically at war with the American puppet state in the South. So So there's often, I often see that from royalists. Not saying you did that, but royalists often say, "Oh, it's enough. You know, it's worse than North, or it's as bad as North Korea." No, totally different situation where the leaders in North Korea are rightly celebrated because they keep their people free from colonization by the US and Britain.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, so yeah, we talked about their PR team, but they actually did something themselves in 1992, which was the Queen's Annus Horribilis. So that was this terrible year where there was a series of disasters for the royal family. Fergie was exposed, getting her toes sucked, and you know, Charles's marriage was failing, and all that kind of stuff. So she set up a group with Philip, their children, and the grandchildren, Princes Harry and William, and they convene every 6 months. They called it the Way Ahead Group, and basically they set this up to manage their own PR, and you know, I think they realised that they could be in deep trouble. The whole thing, the whole edifice rests on people being manipulated into this image. And like we were saying before, people just I think a lot of people just haven't ever questioned any of it. You know, a lot of people got better things to do, I suppose.
We don't.
We certainly don't. And if you did question, you know, if you question it for 2 seconds, the whole thing falls apart, because it's
that's true.
It's just ridiculous.
It does.
So ridiculous. So anyway, so some of the ideas they came up with initially was they'd volunteer to pay some taxes. That's why that, you know, so when people, you know, that's something, oh, they don't pay any taxes, and then the royalists can go, oh well, they do, they pay some taxes. I'll come back to that in a bit when we talk about their finances. They opened Buckingham Palace to visitors, and they decommissioned the royal yacht, which they keep wanting back, and the Tories keep wanting to give them that back, actually. And then also, their biggest PR weapon was Princess Diana. And this country is just so deeply messed up that even Republicans, even like people who think that they're staunch Republicans, will defend the honour of Princess Diana and go on about how she was murdered by the royal family and all this kind of stuff. Whether she was or she wasn't, I don't know. I don't particularly care either.
No.
She was, as far as I'm concerned, she was just another one of these blood-sucking parasites.
Okay.
And she's got this reputation for like charity and all the rest of it. So when she died, she had, I'm not sure the total of her estate, but she had stocks. She had at least 17 million from a divorce settlement with Charles.
Yeah.
She had various other things that, and she gave the whole lot to her sons, which I'm not sure. I'm not sure I'd describe Prince Harry and Prince William as the most deserving cases of charity.
No.
Shows how hollow any kind of. I don't really accept that any charity work they do is worthwhile anyway. One, because often for them to turn up at any charity event costs more than whatever they raise because of security and all that kind of stuff. And two, it's not theirs to give. Like, they don't, they should literally have every single penny stripped from them and put to use with reparations. They've not earned a single penny that they've got. So, to quote Shania Twain, it don't impress me much. So
the charity thing is interesting, isn't it? The charity thing is interesting. I mean, I've worked for a couple of charities in my time. I suppose the quite self-serving, really, isn't it? Because it's to promote their own image above all everything else. I mean, if working for a charity or putting your name to a charity didn't benefit the royals, they wouldn't do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Simple as that. They don't give a shit about starving kids or people with disabilities or animals or anything. I really don't think they do. I just think they get a clear benefit from it, and it's just interesting when you see how their charity work actually operates. I mean, they don't do much of the hands-on work themselves at all, do they? They just turn up. Turn up to an event.
Turn up and get a nice glass of champagne and.
Yeah, and like you say, the security costs for hosting them are huge, and they get and we'll come on to this later, but they're hidden costs in having the royals, I think, because they get passed on to local police, local councils and stuff, and it's a massive cost, isn't it? I didn't realise this, but when the Queen goes to like a factory in Lancashire or something, the local area has to pay like hundreds of thousands of pounds.
Yeah.
To host the Queen, all of the security and everything. So costs to have the Queen there. And
last time William and Kate visited Manchester, the police went around destroying homeless people's tents and confiscating their tents and sleeping bags, driving them off the streets because we can't disturb the sensibilities of the delicate sensibilities of Kate and Wills.
There was that's a good one. There's another really good one. In Windsor when they were going to have the wedding. I think the local council actually tried to ban homeless people from 5 square miles from the castle or something.
Yeah.
It didn't go through. I think there was a big enough outcry that it didn't go through. But the fact they tried to do that.
I think it did though, didn't it? I think it did.
Oh right, I might be wrong.
I might be wrong as well, but I thought it did go through. They used like a 19th century vagrancy act.
Oh right, okay, yeah.
I remember because this Tory council leader was going on about how rough sleepers around Windsor were exploiting residents and tourists. And they basically need to lock it up.
That's it.
Which is just like
It's actually really funny.
Go on.
I was just going to say, really funny. Have you ever been to Windsor?
Yeah.
You ever been to Windsor?
Yeah.
Have you ever been to a Starbucks in Windsor? Like like where the castle is. There's loads of like cafes, right? You go and sit. It's the only time in the UK this has ever happened to me. You go and sit in a Starbucks or a Costa or a Nero, and you sit there and you don't order a drink, right? These are the ones right near the castle, right? They're not the ones that are further away. You'll get hassled by the staff. I actually went in there once and I was waiting for a student, and the manager came over and he's like, and I was quite well dressed. The manager came over and he was like, look, if you're not buying a drink straight away, you have to leave. And I was like, this is really, really weird. And I actually think, like, in hindsight now, I think because it's Windsor and because it's right next to the castle, I think all those managers in those cafes or whatever just must be given like some kind of zero tolerance policy. You know, anyone who could be any kind of vagrant or anything or any kind of, you know, whatever, has to be moved on.
I just can't wait. I just can't wait till we get rid of them. We take all their palaces and castles off them. I just can't wait.
Yeah.
Because we'll just all rough sleepers in this country will just instantly be living in palaces, and that would be great. I've always said Buckingham Palace to just be great social housing. You know, you just get it and you just turn it into flats. Yeah.
And you could probably fit over 1,000 people in there easily. It's got 4 miles of corridors.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, it's got... Anyway, that's a separate thing.
Just the amazing thing about what this council leader was saying, that rough sleepers who are 17 times more likely to be victims of crime than otherwise, than, you know, people with stable homes. You know, that they're victims of crime. To say that they are criminals and that they're exploiting residents and tourists, and also like when the royal family are one of the big, well, if not the biggest landlord in the country.
Yeah,
and that's
when's the last time you got exploited by a homeless person? In it. I mean, you know, like they might ask you for like 20p to buy a cup of tea, but I wouldn't say that's exploiting me.
Yeah,
I don't think that's. I don't think that's exploitation.
Homeless guy outside the supermarket the other day was telling me earlier in the day someone had run off with his money. A couple of months ago, two homeless women on the tram got threatened by some guy. Just started shouting.
Yeah.
He was getting off the tram and he just started shouting at them. And he's like, "Get off the tram!"
Well,
he's basically saying, "Get off the tram," so that he could beat them up.
Him.
Well,
they were probably trying to exploit him.
Yeah, trying to exploit him by forcing him to beat them up, and then
by breathing oxygen.
It happens all the time. This is as horrible as they are. That these are relatively mild things. Yeah. So just for these people with like 4 palaces and 3 castles to claim that rough sleepers are exploiting people in Windsor for their shitty little wedding, it's just
yeah.
And then also we're going to say something, because you said about like they don't actually care about children or wildlife or anything.
Yeah.
So there's been a couple of hilarious examples of this when Harry and William pledged to do all they could to save Africa's endangered wildlife. 10 days earlier, they'd been on a boar and deer trip
I saw
in Spain.
I saw that. Mad.
And the thing about children is I was going to talk about that a bit later when we talk about some of the individuals. Like Philip is explicit that he doesn't like children, and we've got plenty of examples of being a disgusting bully towards children. But he said, you know, he doesn't even give a shit about his own kids, and neither does the Queen. Apart from, you know, when it affects their image, or maybe when they get a bit older, she starts to care. I don't know. They keep telling me they're hardworking, so Prince Charles is dubbed the hardest working royal.
Yeah.
So
apparently, if you divide up all the royal engagements and all the time that they actually do between all of them, all of the active members of the royal family, not all the distant cousins and stuff, it works out. I've not got the exact figure in front of me, but it works out at like 4 hours a week or something, or less than that even.
Yeah.
So that's all of the visits that, you know, the Queen would do, Philip used to do.
Yeah.
All of the tours of, like, you know, the tours of Africa that, you know, all of the time on there, which is basically a glorified holiday. But
and like I've heard BBC correspondents like, she's had to stand up.
Yeah, when she's 95, she's going to step back. But yeah.
Is she? Is that?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. So what?
Yeah. I mean, the latest. Yeah, according to the latest developments, when she's 95, she's going to start to. She's not going to retire. She's going to start to hand over stuff to Charles. More stuff to Charles, apparently, and William. And but yeah, this work issue. I mean, they really don't work, do they? I mean, they really don't. apparently the salary that Andrew had for his role before he just, before he's recently retired from public life because of the pedo thing, he was on over 200 grand a year. So basically, he's getting paid 200 grand a year to just, like you were saying before, just travel around the world, schmooze people, talk to arms dealers, stay with Epstein. So all those times he was staying with Epstein, he's being paid to do that. He's being paid a salary of 200 grand, and that's not including all of his other interests and property that he's got and money that the royal family will have given him on top of that. So he's obviously very rich anyway. But 200 grand a year for basically doing fuck all.
Just to add to that, like. Also the corruption involved, like when Fergie got caught talking to that fake sheikh guy.
Oh, the scandal.
Yeah, so Fergie, Prince Andrew's wife, was taped demanding $821,000 in return for business access to Prince Andrew.
Yeah.
And Fergie said, I quote, "You'll get it back tenfold. That opens up everything you would ever wish for. And I can open any door you want, and I will for you." So they're just utterly corrupt.
Yeah,
that's what it's about. And like you say, like, okay, it doesn't actually matter. Like they could be working 10, 12-hour days. It wouldn't make it any better. Like because
it wouldn't make a difference. I mean, if Andrew was working 10 to 12-hour days, like in an office, it wouldn't change anything because he's still completely corrupt.
And what's he working for? It's like they're not doing good things that help us. They're helping themselves. They're sweetening arms deals. Like that's if the royals actually started rolling up their sleeves and doing much more hard work, that wouldn't be good for anyone because their work entails schmoozing with dictators. For example, there was
there's loads of examples of them schmoozing dictators, isn't there?
So there's one where Prince Charles went and did the sword dance with the Saudi princes, and the next day they bought 72 Typhoon fighter jets. I mean, he's actually complained about this. He's complained about being used as a to help sweeten these arms deals. Not that he's got any kind of moral qualms about the arms themselves. I think it's just he'd rather be lounging around doing nothing. But I think that's what his complaint was about. But this is related to another point that I've also been told by so-called Republicans a few times, is that they're like, oh, why are you upset at the royal? Why are you angry at the royals? Like, they're not the problem. It's the real problems, the banks or this or that, big corporations, they're the problem. Where do you think all their money's invested? Like, it doesn't just sit there. They're heavily invested in BAE Systems, one of the biggest death dealers in the world. They're heavily involved in Lonrho. Do you know Lonrho? Used to be London and Rhodesian Mining and Land Company. So that's a company that's like just mining and looting in Africa and taking their resources and exploiting labour there. They're invested in companies like Bright House, which also has a lovely reputation. Bright House has been, I think they actually got fined for exploitative sales techniques that they were exploiting the elderly and people with learning disabilities. During Britain's destruction of Iraq, they profited from that and use of depleted uranium, which is against the Geneva Convention. So they're up to their necks in militarism, death, wars of aggression. They're up to their necks in dirty capitalism, exploiting people. They're up to their necks in imperialism. They've got colonial property in Ireland, for example. I just keep emphasising that I get these kind of things from Republicans as well. Supposed Republicans that will defend the Queen, that will do. They just think that maybe our system would be a little bit better and more democratic if we were a republic. Otherwise, the royal family's fine. Queen's a lovely old woman, and so on. I went to a protest in London, protesting the visit of Donald Trump. One of the speakers, I think he was from a socialist party. It might have been the Socialist Workers' Party, but I can't say that for sure. But it was a party with socialist in the name anyway. And he was an older guy, and he was outraged that Donald Trump was going to sully our wonderful Queen Elizabeth.
All of the facts we've mentioned today in the podcast are really good facts. It's really important to get the facts out there because that can help win over a lot of people. But I think we also need to attack, the fundamental intuitions or needs or whatever that underlie support for the monarchy. And what I was now going to do is then talk about Marxism, because I think that, if you think about Marxism and thinking about this in terms of class, I think it's really interesting how, you can kind of see these ideas that are pro-royal, they're basically, most of them, I think, are about, maintaining the status quo, maintaining the grip of capitalism, maintaining false consciousness, all of these things that we talk about as Marxists. I think the royal family really tie into those things very, very well, and they're kind of a solidifying force for capitalism in a lot of ways, and they go hand in hand with capitalism in a lot of ways, which is very interesting. Because what I was going to also talk about, and I want you to jump in here as well, is that if you see the history of the royal family in Europe especially, it is a kind of struggle between classes. French Revolution, what happened there? Well, the middle classes got more powerful and got rid of the king. It was a conflict between the aristocracy and the middle classes. And the middle classes, growing more and more powerful, took power away from the royals and got rid of them. And I think that if you see it in terms of a class struggle, it becomes very, very clear and very, very interesting, because that legacy goes down to today, because I think we've still got that class struggle. The difference is we didn't get rid of them like France did. They managed to stay embedded in their positions, unlike in France. And I think we did have, we have class conflicts all over the world, obviously, but for whatever reason, they managed to hold on to power here. I mean, in Greece they didn't, for example. In France they didn't. In Russia they didn't. So really interesting, because when you get Oliver Cromwell coming in, I think one of the interesting things is that when you get, and this isn't just my idea, I've seen this all over the place actually, when you kind of look into the monarchy and critics of the monarchy, what you effectively see when the monarchy comes back in England, what I think you do see is it's a kind of negotiation or truce between the aristocracy, the royals, and this kind of growing middle class. So what you get is, I think you get an integration between the royals, the aristocracy, and this kind of powerful middle class that's been rising up in, since medieval times, and you get a kind of compromise, and you actually get the royal family then embedded within capitalism to some extent, and you get a kind of treaty between capitalists, bourgeoisie, whatever you want to call them, and the royals, and it's a real close relationship. And I think it's really true. So if you look nowadays, what do you see? Well, you see the royals doing arms deals. Basically Andrew is going around the world doing capitalist deals to keep the industrial war machine going and to keep the profits coming in. You see royal branding on consumer goods. You see that thing where you have approved by the royal household or whatever, and you see, Waitrose has it, and all sorts of brands have it. And that's a classic compromise, or whatever you want to call it, business relationship between capitalism and royalty. And it could have gone other ways. I mean, I think with the French Revolution, I think one of the reasons, and with the Russian Revolution, is that the royals there, they didn't want to give up any power whatsoever, and they wanted to carry on spending, and they wanted, French royalty wanted to live in gold palaces, and they didn't care about the middle classes or the lower classes. The Tsar was completely oblivious to what was going on in the country. Any kind of compromise he gave was just at face value. He wasn't interested in giving any of his powers away, and they got rid of him. So I think what the English royal family have done, and feel free to jump in if any of this is kind of wrong or you disagree or whatever. I think what they've done is a kind of pact or truce between different classes to kind of keep themselves afloat. And I think
Absolutely.
If you look at it like that, you can trace it all the way back to feudalism and beyond, So in a way, you've almost got to admire the kind of duplicity and treachery and, willingness to survive at all odds, really. Because, one final thing I want to say is that royalty is a feudalist idea. Well, it's pre-feudalist, but really it's a feudalist idea. And it survived all the way through to the 21st century. It survived feudalism, it survived capitalism, and it's kind of survived by sneakily kind of embedding itself within our day-to-day practices, and it kind of proves in a way that it is a kind of dinosaur that's kind of still managed to survive, these hundreds and hundreds of years. So if you want to jump in on any of that, please do.
Yeah,
I don't want to.
I think there's only about 20 odd monarchies left. There's only 23, 25, something like that. So there's not that many left. You can almost consider the royal families of Europe as one big family that kind of different branches of it in different countries. But yeah, it's dying out. Those last 20 odd. Who knows how long they will last, but they won't last forever for sure.
No, definitely.
And I think future generations will look back and just kind of think, wow, that was. I think they'll look back at this as like a dark age.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I was talking about this with someone else the other day. Like, I mean, imagine a feudalist peasant sitting on his little crop of land, and he's eating potatoes, and he's got his lord and stuff like that. But he's got to bow and scrape to, and all that kind of stuff. I mean, if you move forward into past feudalism, and you look back on that, we see that as a complete backwards stage in culture and society now, don't we? But we're kind of, in a way, we're still there. In a way, we still are the feudal peasant. We've got a bit more freedom, as Marx says, we've got freedom in some, got slightly more freedom in some ways, but we're in the same situation in many other ways. Under capitalism, we're enslaved in a different way. So, like you say, looking back on this period, people will wonder what the hell. Like, why is the royal family still? I mean, why did we put up with this shit? Why did we get rid of them? Like the French did and the Russians did, and it's going to be very, very weird to look back and see how we're all falling over ourselves, worshipping the Queen.
I think you could say the British royal family is the most powerful royal family in the world.
Oh, of course, absolutely.
How
have we done that?
Yeah, right. So that we can segue quite nicely into talking about the royal family and capitalism, and talking about their wealth. So first of all, we need to mention that their wealth has come from the British Empire, and the British Empire was a project of land grabbing, genocide. The people on the land that was grabbed by the British were either wiped out or enslaved, and then the resources of that land have been plundered ever since. So that's the wealth that we're talking about. It's criminal wealth, and it all deserves to be paid back to, every single penny of it deserves to be paid back to indigenous people around the world. So getting to the bottom of how much the royal family or the Queen is worth is kind of impossible because it's all just firewalled, and like most government documents, classified documents, are closed to the public for 20 years. Documents related to the royal family are locked for 100 years.
I read that recently.
So they know how dangerous this is. And the whole power of the royal family rests on their reputation and this fantasy that is painted by the media. A lot of it is just classified information. Another reason why it's so difficult to put specific figures on this is that they just don't inventory stuff. So they've got these massive collections, antiques, stamps, you name it. And they just don't inventory it, so they'll just deliberately leave it all kind of unorganized and don't write anything down about it, and then we can't possibly. But anyway, Forbes, I don't know how they've come up with this figure, but they estimate the Queen's net worth at about 420 million. That was in 2017. That doesn't include the 12 billion pound Crown Estate. The Crown Estate has kind of a strange legal status, so it's owned by the Crown. It's not the Queen's personal property. There's like a corporation that kind of represents the legal embodiment of the state. But even though she doesn't own it, the family still get 15% of the profits. That includes. So this is a 12 billion pound entity, and it includes colonial property in Ireland. It includes Ascot Racecourse, and then it includes just lots of residential property. So, like Regent Street and St James's, it includes that, or just commercial offices So half of all office space in the West End is part of the Crown Estate. They've got 17 retail parks. You know, so you might pop down to your B&Q in one of these retail parks, and it could be owned by the Crown Estate. Profits tend to be at least £300 million a year. So they get 15% of that. They've got one of the largest, most valuable art collections in the world. They've got one of the world's largest stamp collections. They've got private collections of antique furniture and jewellery, valued at £84 million. They've got 13 royal residences, and each of the palaces and castles. So they're not just like, it's not just like 13 one-bedroom flats. And then they get a huge amount of money for the upkeep of the residences. So they don't even like repair their own properties. And apparently a third of their residential properties have fallen into disrepair. And then they get profits from tourists, and they get profits from events organised at the palaces. And we're talking several £1 million for each. So they're getting all, and then then the Queen owns the Duchy of Lancaster. So that's 45,000 acres.
This is the really interesting part.
And it's mostly in the north of England. Prince Charles owns the Duchy of Cornwall, which isn't just Cornwall. It's across. It's weird. It's kind of across various counties. It includes the Isles of Scilly. It's 50,000 acres. Apparently, it's across 23 counties. And then anybody who dies without a will in those areas, any assets or property or money goes to the Queen or Prince Charles. So they just confiscate.
I mean, that's almost like something out of feudal times, isn't it? Like we were saying how it's kind of linked. You know, the royal family are kind of dinosaurs from the feudal age, but that exactly proves it. It's exactly the kind of thing that would happen to a feudal peasant. You know, his master would take his share of land or whatever.
But by 43 minutes past midnight, so 43 minutes into the new year, the monarchy have already accumulated the average UK salary. It takes you or me to earn in a whole year. They've earned within the first 3/4 of an hour of the year, and they're exempt from taxes. So this is something that people grumble about, and this is something that they decided to tackle in the 90s when they were having an image problem. So they began volunteering to pay some tax, just as a PR stunt, basically. But even so, they still use tax havens for some of their other investments. So, I mean, this was uncovered in the Paradise Papers. So the Queen had millions invested in the Cayman Islands. And we found out about, again, to pick up on your point, they're totally embedded within British capitalism. They've got investments in Threshers off licence, Bright House. Then we've got to pay for the upkeep of their most of their estate. So Buckingham Palace has 400 members of staff. Some of those members of staff are kept on 0 hours contracts, by the way. Considering Buckingham Palace has 52 bedrooms, and the government a few years ago imposed this bedroom tax, which hit the poorest very badly and disabled people in particular. When Buckingham Palace recently, well, it was a year or two ago now, wasn't it? It needed some renovations. The government actually raised the percentage that they derive from, that the royal family derives from the Crown Estate, from 15 to 25% temporarily to pay for these refurbishments, which is just the weirdest thing, because it's like if Westminster needed funds for refurbishment and we temporarily tripled the MP's salaries or doubled it, just to tackle this idea that they're somehow cost effective. So we're talking about people who just have no concept of money in ordinary life. They lavish steaks cooked by an actual chef for their pet dogs, corgis, and the steaks are delivered on a silver platter by a footman to the pet dogs.
Of course they are.
Like Charles once took a train to a pub which cost £20,000. Prince Andrew spent £15,000 on a round trip to see the golf. Harry and Meghan's wedding was estimated to have cost about £24 million just in security and road closures. Charles has a staff of 120, and that includes like 4 valets to help him get dressed.
Yeah, I've heard about this, and apparently he only wears shoes that are the cheapest pair of shoes he owns are like $3,000 or something.
Really?
He refuses to wear shoes that are cheaper.
Wow.
And he's obviously got a wardrobe full of shoes, so you know.
So these are this is cost effective apparently.
Yeah.
I mean, of course you need 4 valets to help you get dressed. Imagine having to get dressed by yourself, you know.
Yeah. Well, it's almost like a baby, isn't it? It's like when you have a baby that
They're
can't
like overgrown babies, yeah.
I mean, it is almost like he just has a nappy and shits himself and someone comes in and changes the nappy. That's literally the level of like, they're almost like infants, aren't they?
I can imagine. Right, now this for me story absolutely sums up the Queen and the royal family. And if anyone says, "Oh, the Queen's just a lovely old lady," you know, she's just a nice old lady, or whatever, right? The Queen demanded that the government give a handout of £1 million to heat the empty rooms of Buckingham Palace, and she wanted it from a fund that is ordinarily put aside for those suffering energy poverty. So we're talking about hospitals, schools, housing associations. We're talking about elderly people in this country during the winter die at a rate of 1 every 7 minutes due to energy poverty, you know? And a lot of people are facing a choice between eating and heating. People literally starving, you know, starving and freezing to death. This like literal billionaire wants £1 million of that money that's set aside for people freezing to death, and she wants it to heat empty rooms in an actual palace. You don't do that unless you have utter contempt for poor people.
Of course, yeah.
You know,
of course,
that's an absolutely sociopathic killer. Right.
Absolutely.
So, okay.
Can I just jump in really quickly?
Go for it.
Yeah. Just talking about costs. I mean, I'm not going to go on all day and throw numbers at you, but there's this really interesting stat that I've seen about the royal expenses. So apparently, the official royal household claim that the expenses of the royal family are about 76 million a year. So that's what they cost us. But if you do the real math, it's actually closer to 345 million a year. And the reason it is because, I mean, you've alluded to a lot of this stuff, but yeah, so you've got the sovereign grant, which is 76 million, which is where that 76 million comes from. But on top of that, you've got the cost of maintaining the buildings used by the royal family, like you've said. You've got the security is the biggest one. So £100 million a year is spent on security, and what they do, like when the royal household releases its costs and its budget, it doesn't include security. So 76 million, okay, that's a lot of money, but what they're doing is they're making it a lot smaller than it really is by just ignoring things like security, upkeep of buildings.
Yeah.
I mean, there's all sorts of other stuff. Cost to local councils, for example, is 22 million. Apparently, the Duke of Edinburgh gets a payment of 400 grand a year. That's just a special like fee that he's somehow just awarded just for being the Duke of Edinburgh.
Sounds
he's got
fair.
government. Yeah, fair enough. I mean, he's a busy man. He's got stuff to do. £3.8 million just for costs met by government departments. So that's just quite a shadowy thing. What does that mean? I mean, I think a lot of these things, if you really delved into them, would just be sneaky little deals under the table. I give you cash, you give me favours, quid pro. That's basically what a lot of this is, I reckon. I mean, obviously the security is fair enough. We all understand what security is, but 100 million quid on security, that is ridiculous. I mean, who's getting the contracts for those security?
And it'd be a lot. There'd be a lot cheaper to provide security if they were just all in prison. Which is exactly. That'd be a lot cheaper, which is where they should be.
So there's a lot of like smoke and mirrors and all sorts of stuff. I mean,
sorry, but I was just going to add to that.
No, it's all right. I mean, I've just got another couple of little
go for it.
Nuggets for you. We've talked about the cost of repairs and stuff. I mean, apparently in 2016 the government planned to spend over 369 million on Buckingham Palace over 10 years. I think we mentioned that before. Yeah. Which is an absolutely ridiculous amount. I mean, that's crazy. Okay, so the government's so the government's announcing costs for that. So again, when you're saying that they're good value for money, I mean that's just one building, £369 million. And the ridiculous thing about that is if they're simultaneously saying that the royal family costs us 70 million a year, yet it almost at the same time they're telling us it's 369 million to fix one building. You know, it doesn't add up. It's clearly bullshit. You know, it's like those two numbers.
And then the other trick they do is they divide. So instead of taking the full amount, which is the 345 million, they take the sovereign grant amount, which is what was it, 70, and then they divide it by the total population. And then dividing it by how many taxpayers there are, they divide it by the population of the country, and then say, oh, and then they work it out. It's something like 50p each. Oh, it's just 50p each. Yeah, like 50p each. Come on, you begrudge a billionaire 50p. Well, yeah, I do. I still definitely begrudge them that 50p. But the thing is, it's a lump sum. So like 345 million, that goes a long way in a society where so many people are visiting food bank and so many people are needlessly homeless. So.
Absolutely.
Where we've got cuts to services. So like 300 million would pay for 15,000 teachers or firefighters.
And also Grenfell Tower burning down, all that stuff.
And then the other thing they do, and this is, it's good value for money because the sovereign grant is better than, basically because we get something out of the sovereign grant. So like this was a deal in going back to sort of 1760 between monarchy and parliament, and they're trying to argue that this is somehow a good deal, that the monarchy only gets 15%. How is that a good deal? They don't deserve a single penny. They don't deserve any of it.
Like saying, I mean, that's like saying someone's going to rob my house, but they're only going to rob half my stuff because they're nice. So I should thank them for only robbing half my stuff, right? Same thing, isn't it?
Oh my word! Just the contortion, the mental contortions that people.
We should be grateful. I think we should actually just do like an apology right now and just say this podcast is not. We don't actually mean any of it, and we're really sorry.
The fact that we can give these real life examples of people arguing these things, it just shows how infantilized so many people are in Britain, and how it's just humiliating.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's kind of logic. I mean, like the logic of it is so simple. A 10-year-old could understand this. These numbers we're talking about, a 10-year-old could understand it. Unwilling or, refusing to just see the obvious. I don't understand it. I really do not understand it. And it goes back to what we were saying before. It's not a rational thing. And we'll come back to this at the end if you don't mind. But there's something going on here. With people's relationship to the monarchy, and I think it's something to do with love of hierarchy. I think it's something that people internalize from capitalism. It's not a simple rational induction or deduction from anything. I think there's something really sinister about it. We can maybe finish off by talking about that. There's just one more thing I want to say, because I'm pissed off about a lot of this, but this is more than anything else, right? Right, the tourism argument, right? Everybody you ever talk to will give you the tourism argument. Laws are good for tourism, blah, blah, blah. We need to keep them because it brings the money in. Right, so apparently the biggest tourist attractions in the country are Chester Zoo, Stonehenge,
it's a great
and the Roman Bath. So there you go.
But before we talk about tourism, first of all, why is this an argument about? We're talking about our political system. Why are you talking about tourism? What relevance does that have at all?
I mean, let's just do a little thought. Okay, let's just do a little thought experiment. Let's go back to the Third Reich. Yeah, I mean, I hate to mention Nazis because they always come up, but let's go back to the Third Reich and let's just say, for instance, that Hitler has got an amazing zoo in Berlin, right? And it's the most popular zoo. It's the most popular zoo in the world, and it makes a trillion Reichmarks a year. And it's amazing, and the taxes they get off it, they build amazing infrastructure and hospitals. Is that a good reason to keep the Third Reich? Yes or no? It just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how much if something's criminal and wrong and immoral, it doesn't matter if it makes money. I mean, that's the crux of the whole thing, isn't it? That's like.
I love how like the kind of people who make this argument tend to be the kind of Union Jack underpants wearing Middle England types that are get them out types.
Yeah, I mean they love the empire, right? I mean they just want to get rid of the royals because for some reason the royals piss them off because they're jealous of them or whatever. But they love the empire. They love the ideology.
Let's take Britain back, and yet they want to base their political system on foreign visitors. But anyway, it doesn't even make sense. Like if you got rid of the monarchy, you would still have all those palaces and castles, and people would actually be opened up and put to use.
Exactly.
We'd have much greater access to all these collections of art, antiques, and all the rest of it. Yeah, I do think there's something worthwhile about spectacular buildings. And
the thing is, this is going to happen. The thing is, it sounds silly to say it. I know we're making jokes and stuff. This will happen. It's inevitable that these parasites will be erased. It will happen. It's just maybe not in our lifetime, but hopefully in 300 years, someone will listen to this podcast and go, "Those guys actually were right." It has to happen. It has to happen. It has to fall. The dominoes have to fall.
Our
capitalism has to go. It will happen.
But and then the other thing is like who sits around planning their holidays and thinks, well, I quite like to go to France, but they haven't got a monarchy, so
Well, people go to Versailles. People go to Versailles. That's a massively popular thing, isn't it? The Palace of Versailles.
Well, France is the most visited country in the world, isn't it?
Exactly. And they've got all the palaces still there. I mean, they've preserved quite a lot of it. You can see it. Yeah. And it's great. It's great. It makes shitloads of money, and it's good. It makes more money than our palaces because they're not open. It's because there was that famous argument, wasn't there? But apparently, the royals got really annoyed because they were advised to open Buckingham Palace more days of the year. And they don't want to. But at the same time, they want us to pay for the refurbishment. So I think the argument was, I don't know who said it to them, but I think it was the PM at the time. The argument was, well, to pay for your refurbishment, if you just open Buckingham Palace just a few more days a year, that will pay for your refurbishment. That will pay millions. And they still said no. They still said no. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Like, what's the logic of that? That's like you said before, the Queen is not like a nice old grandmother. She's ruthless. Anybody that would make
absolutely
that decision.
Cold-blooded. All right,
it's absolute cold-bloodedness.
Is there anything else you want to say about that? Because we can move on to.
No, I'm just looking here. Like, I mean, there's some real shitty statistics here. I mean, like, Visit Britain claim that the royal family generate 500 million in tourism every year, which is completely false. I just want to debunk that straight away.
Yeah. Completely
false. Because this is based on a survey. So every tourist that comes in has to do one of those, multiple choice surveys. Yeah. And apparently 28% of people said that they were attracted by Britain's culture and heritage. So Visit Britain assumed what that means is they're coming just because of the royal family. So obviously Britain's culture and heritage is bigger than the royal family. Anyone can agree on that. So, but the research is deeply flawed, because obviously as well you've got the fact that the royal family, the palaces and stuff aren't the most visited landscapes or venues, and you've even got stuff like Shakespeare's Globe. I mean, I guarantee you Shakespeare's Globe is visited more than Buckingham Palace, I would say. So all this kind of stuff. Anyway, let's maybe park that for now. I mean, there is a really interesting thing here about the Crown Estate that I was going to talk about, and the duchies.
Go for it.
There's so many things to say, though. I don't want to kill all the time. Let's just go to the duchies, because the duchies is where it really gets. I think it really gets like grubby with the duchies. It gets really cheeky with what they do. I mean, I know you've touched on this before as to what they are. So basically, they're basically portfolios of land and businesses and properties and whatever all across the country, right? So that's all it is. When we say the duchy, that's all we mean, right? And then the revenue from those goes to the Queen and Prince Charles, right? So we know that. Me not owning, me not owning Richmond Park, but then collecting, you know, all of the revenues from Richmond Park, all of the profits, all of the whatever. So really weird.
Yeah, they're properties of the institution. They're not part of the Crown Estate, but they are the properties of the institution. So the Duchy of Lancaster is the property of the monarch.
Yeah.
Not Queen Elizabeth, not Elizabeth Windsor privately, but they are separate to the Crown Estate, and the Duchy of Cornwall is the property of the successor to the monarch.
So this is the point, I think, for me, is that the status of the duchies is really important because they're not the personal property of the individual royals. There's an opinion here that, I mean, there was a tribunal ruling about this because they can be classed as part of the state, or, you know, they can be seen as a public authority. So basically, they can be seen as like a state asset, or they can be seen as a personal asset. Now, the problem is, I think, is that if you're taking profit from it, you know, if Charles and Philip the Queen are taking profit from it, that suggests that it's a personal asset. But legally, it's not a personal asset. It's a state asset. So it's kind of like a grey area where they don't legally own it, but they take the profit from it. So again, it's like a loophole. I need to probably read into it a little bit more because there's been various legal challenges to it, but it's kind of like a loophole where they own it, but they don't own it. And they kind of take profit from it, but they don't actually own it. And the other problem there is that if they're taking profit from it and not paying tax, that's another layer of bullshit. Because if you're taking money from something and then not paying tax on it, that's even worse. I mean, we've talked about tax already, but the point there is that if it's a state asset, or if the state owns it, then anything coming off the back of it should surely be taxable, right? And should go back to the state. You know, any revenue that comes off it should go back to the state. So I suppose it's like if the state owned like a lot of like national parks, maybe might be owned by the state. I don't know the law and the ins and outs in it, but you know, say if the state owns like a national reserve or a national park, and that park makes $100 grand a year, then the state would pay taxes on that, or whatever, or at least some of that money would go back into the state, right? Well, that's not what's happening here. So again, I mean, we don't get too bogged down in it, but it just seems again another example of just complete and utter skullduggery. Really,
shitfuckery. I was going to say
shitfuckery, skullduggery, corruption. It's corruption, really.
Yeah.
The interesting thing is none of this has really been brought up. I mean, if you think about the way the media works, it's really interesting because, like, you know, if something happens in the media, you know, like if Jeremy Corbyn left his laptop on a train in London, it'd be at the front page of every newspaper, right? But if Charles and the Queen take money from a state body that they shouldn't take money from and don't pay tax on it, and this has been going on for however many years, like no one seems to, you know, and again, it comes back to, I mean, unfortunately, as everything does, it comes back to capitalism, doesn't it? I mean, these parasites are, you know, they're basically kind of like capitalist catalysts in a way, aren't they?
Yeah.
You know, they're lubricants. I mean, like, Charles is like a fluffer for world capital. He's like a fluffer. Yeah, that's what they are. The royal family are fluffers for the forces of world capital. So I mean, it's that kind of thing. Anyway, I think the financial stuff, that's probably enough of it. I mean, anybody who wants to find out more about this, it's all over the internet. I mean, you can go to, I mean, the Republic website is very good, republic.org.uk. I'm not sure if we're allowed to shout out particular websites.
Of course.
Not sure if you cut that out or not.
No,
but it's really quite good. Really,
we'll go to Pitchfork Cosmonaut.org.
Oh right, yeah.
A few good articles there.
I've heard that can be quite
controversial.
Dodgy, though.
Bit spicy.
Yeah.
Bit spicy.
And there's quite a few people have blocked you. Yeah.
That's true. That is true.
Yeah.
All right. So next section we're going to get onto like five worst royals. So
right, yeah.
I'm just going to start with a very, very quick Prince Harry. God.
Yeah.
Just this down with the kids type thing just sickens me. exemplified by Labour MP Angela Rayner, who is awful in many other ways, but I think her royalism is just sickening. So actually, her fellow MP Emma Denko started slagging Harry off for failing his helicopter exam 4 times, and he had to end up settling for co-pilot because he couldn't be trusted to take charge of the chopper himself. And Angela Rayner leapt to his defence, saying he'd made the royals trendy again.
Oh my God.
She said, they are part of the staple British diet. I'm absolutely clear that the monarchy is here and they are going to be around for a long time. I think Harry's been doing a fantastic job, especially with regard to our veterans. I personally feel the current generation, Prince Harry, Prince William and Kate, have done the royal family proud.
That's disgusting. That's actually disgusting.
Yeah. And then this whole Invictus Games thing. Oh my God!
Oh, yeah.
Just like this is a guy who took war, war so kind of the horror of war so seriously and so gravely that he compared it to playing PlayStation, Xbox, and thought he was quite useful with his thumbs. And then he set up this Invictus Games where former terrorists in the British military go and.
They should call it the terrorist game.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it was the first one, George Bush, who's also a draft dodger, by the way, and basically responsible for the mutilation of the people taking part in that games. He kind of headlined the opening. So yeah, just PR stunts like that are just awful. And then I alluded to him failing the helicopter exam 4 times. I mean, he's just got a free ride through life. He also, one of his teachers was a whistleblower, and she admitted to help basically doing his coursework for him, and and she got sacked for that. 23 grand a year they paid for his education at Eton.
Yeah,
and he got and. I don't want to say these grades as if like getting low grades in your GCSE and A levels doesn't mean it's a rigged system. I'm not trying to point this out to say like people failing or getting low academic grades is somehow means you're stupid or is some kind of moral judgment or anything like that. But I just want to say that they paid 23 grand a year for his education. These are supposed to be, the creme de la creme, according to their ideology, with their pure blood and DNA and all the rest of it. You got 2 A levels, you got a B in art and a D in geography. Prince Charles got two A levels, a B in history and a C in French, and got into Cambridge with that and got a 2-2 in history. Nothing wrong with, I'm not saying if you got a B in history and a C in French and then a 2-2 in history that there's anything wrong with that. But if you're the successor to the throne and you got into Cambridge with those scores, there's something fishy going on, isn't there? And they all get into Cambridge. Prince Edward got like a C, a D, and a D, and also got into Cambridge and got a 2-2. They're just freeloaders. Yeah,
I mean, I heard a really interesting story actually that William and Harry, there was a plan at one point to send them to Cambridge or Oxford. I think Cambridge, because a lot of the divorce goes to Cambridge. And then I think there was a PR move made in the background to basically say, look, don't send these guys because, times are changing now. And this whole thing, getting a free pass into university. I mean, these guys get a free pass in life. We know that.
Yeah.
But it's getting really, really blatant. To send them to Cambridge just would have been too blatant, especially with all of this heat in the press about equal opportunities to Cambridge. State school kids not getting into Cambridge. I think there was a tactical decision made not to send them to Cambridge because I think that would have backfired on the Royals in some way. So I think that's really interesting that some PR guy behind the scenes is kind of pulling the strings and kind of telling them
absolutely
not to do that.
They just cross at everything.
And William's very much the same.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just the reputation that just sickens me. And the way they go to events, they go to visit primary schools, and they just get this adulation. Yeah, and it's just sickening. And like William's another one. They're visiting these places, and they despise us. They're disgusted by us. William went to another one of these parties, these fancy dress parties, and he dressed up as, in air quotes, a chav, and he apparently thought so. He turned up with a baseball bat. I don't know whether it was a real one or like an inflatable one or whatever. But the point is that he thinks that poor people are somehow like mindless thugs, and that's emblematic of a chav to brandish a baseball bat when these people are like mass murderers.
Well, yeah. I mean that's part of the game, though, isn't it?
I mean, Harry's literally gone to the poorest country in the world and compared it to playing PlayStation when he's shot down probably farmers in Afghanistan. Yeah. Well, whether it was Taliban fighters or not, I don't know. But he's gone there from relative safety as co-pilot of a helicopter and shot at people. Yeah, for sure. And one thing that really, I mean, I didn't like the guy anyway, but this really sealed it for me. Harry said recently that he was having trouble sleeping at night because he was so stressed because of all the press attention. And he's really stressed, and it's just completely ridiculous. You're probably one of the most privileged people in human history, and then this whole thing about Meghan and him trying to sue the press as well is really interesting. But well, considering I mentioned it before, Princess Michael of Kent turned up with a Blackamoor brooch. Clean your own house. I mean, the thing is that they're right. Like, the media are racist, and Meghan does get that kind of treatment. Yeah. All right. So, what's your top five? Just so I know. So, is it Harry and then Charles and then brief overview of where you go with it? Yeah. Harry, William. Well, I mean, the Queen's number one. I was. It's got to be. I was working backwards, to be honest. Yeah. It's got to be. And Charles and Philip. Philip's an obvious one. I don't know whether is there any point in getting into Philip? I mean, there's so many racist things he said, and he's such a... Yeah, I mean, the thing is with Philip is everyone knows it. You're preaching to the converted there. Yeah. Is there any point? Because the thing with Harry, William, and the Queen is their reputations that the royal family rests on. I think people... Yeah, is there anyone who still thinks that Philip's decent guy? I don't know. He's a piece of shit in so many ways. I've literally got a list of I've got 13 examples of his racism and and then 12 examples of him just being a prick. So anyway, I think should we just skip Philip? Yeah, I mean, unless there's something that you want to make out of it that's useful. I mean, I think he's the only thing I want to make out of it is that how it reflects on the Queen, because somehow she stays innocent in all this. This is a husband. Yeah. Okay. It doesn't mean she has exactly a husband and wife don't necessarily have the same politics and the same views about things. But all the evidence suggests that she's actually not too dissimilar. No, that's fine. I mean, got to take some responsibility for it, hasn't she? It's so well documented with Philip. Whereas I think the danger with Harry and William and the Queen is that they're dangerous because people don't almost suspect them of what they really are. Like the Queen is very good in particular of putting across, like you say, this image of being like a nice old lady, but she's just as scheming and Machiavellian as you can possibly be. Right. Let me get into a little bit of the stuff about the Queen then, because people don't know stuff like when Charles was 5, she left the country for 6 months. When she got back after 6 months away from her 5-year-old, she waited almost a week before she saw him, including having a day out at the races. And then when she did see him, he had to wait in line to greet. I think it's on film. It was like a formal event, and she had to wait at the end of a line to greet her. Yeah. And when she got to him, she shook his hand. Yeah. It's just an alien planet that they're on, and I think it just shows they've got this children should be seen and not heard kind of attitude. I saw a TV show which I thought portrayed this perfectly. Patrick Melrose. It's only five. Right. It's only 5 episodes. Have you heard of it? No, I've not seen it. No. It's good. So it's based on novels written by, I can't remember the name of the writer, but it's kind of autobiographical, and he's from this wealthy aristocratic family, and it just shows his cruel father and his negligent mother.
Yeah.
And it does actually portray, there are some royals actually in it, some real life based on real characters.
Yeah.
This is Philip's attitude to children. He said, holidays are curious things, aren't they? You send children to school to get them out of your hair, then they come back and make life difficult for parents. That is why holidays are set so that they're just about the limit of your endurance. He actually said that at the opening of a school. So, and actually, so this thing about the Queen not bothering with Charles when he's good, it actually happened to her when she was a child as well. So she was abandoned for months while her parents carried on royal duties around the world. They spent 6 months in Australia, and when they got back, they barely recognised her. And then I got a couple of quotes from people who would know this kind of thing. So Anthony J, who's scripted a documentary about her, he says, she's one of those people who's deeply unemotional. For people who are emotionally detached in that way, institutions become more important than families. The Queen's children were handed over to nannies, and a kind of emotional cauterization took place. So they're not a family in the same way. Like, they don't take care of their own kids. They have nannies for that. For example, the Queen would be brought in to see her mother for an hour a day. I read this in a Johann Hari article. Apparently she'd have them chant, "We are not supposed to be normal. We are not supposed to be normal." And Douglas Hurd, a former Foreign Secretary, said that she's almost trained feelings out of herself. So I think it's really important to understand that that's the atmosphere in these, that they're in these vast palaces and castles. They're not a family in the sense that we understand it, and they're not really
human, really.
They're not really human in the way that we understand it either, because of this very strange atmosphere. When they're born, they're headline news. Their first words are headline news. So they've got this kind of ingrained narcissism. They've got this whole ideology about how they've got this pure blood and that they're the creme de la creme and all this kind of thing. And they're taught that they're...
Well, I was just going to say,
And they're given everything, and they're literally waited on hand and foot. Charles has 120 staff that wait, 4 valets to help him get dressed at the age. How old is he now? So getting towards his 70s or something, isn't he? So you've got to get into this mindset, and this mindset, is just utterly sociopathic, and no wonder they have total contempt for ordinary people. Apparently, the Queen has been known to leave her temperate guards for eating snacks that have been left out in bowls in the palace, and these are people that train to put themselves in the way of a bullet for her, and she's losing her temper at them for and you see them fainting at these events where they have to stand absolutely still for hours and hours at a time. One other thing I wanted to say, it's more about the family as a whole. Just to get into this mindset a bit more, is they've got this thing called the Order of Precedence. Do you know about this?
Is that? No, I think I might do. Sorry, go on.
They've got something called the Order of Precedence. So this whole hierarchy thing, it's ingrained to the point where they have to bow and curtsy to their superiors within the family, even in private.
I've heard about this. So Charles
so there's a protocol about who defers to whom. And it's determined by the genetics. So when Prince William got married to Kate, the Queen had to update these protocols so that when Kate doesn't accompany her husband, she has to curtsy to, for example, the Princess Royal, Princess Alexandra, and Beatrice and Eugenie. When William is with her, she doesn't need to curtsy to them, because then she's above them then, but she still has to defer to Charles. And then there's been some controversy within the family about this a few times, but in particular with Camilla, that the Countess of Wessex reportedly didn't like it one bit when she was required to curtsy to Camilla. And
Camilla's not from a standard aristocratic background, is she, Camilla?
Isn't she?
Camilla's kind. No. She's not got any kind of.
She's technically a commoner, is she? Right.
Well, I think the family are very wealthy and kind of upper middle class, but they've got no connections like Diana for example, had
Yeah.
like loads of upper class connections. Like the
Yeah, yeah.
Spencers were like a really famous family and everything else. So yeah, I think that would piss them off having to curtsy to basically a commoner. Yeah.
And it even extends to like what order they arrive at events. So one time Camilla had to wait outside a chapel because Princess Anne hadn't arrived yet, and she couldn't enter before Princess Anne because she wasn't with Charles. It's just it's just so weird. So no wonder they're just incredibly arrogant and, you know, callous. So that, you know, the Queen will happily take £1 million from people who are freezing to death to, you know, to heat empty rooms of Buckingham Palace. Yeah.
Well, we're saying, weren't we, about the it basically creates people who have no empathy whatsoever, massive sense of entitlement, people who don't see other people as human, suffer from all sorts of delusions of grandeur. And, you know, when you put all that together, I was saying to you the other day, wasn't I, that what does that remind you of? Well, yeah, that's kind of like the pathology of a serial killer almost, isn't it? When you put all those characteristics together, that's where you would find that. That's where you would find those characteristics in one person. Murderous, all the rest of it.
And they are killers. We've got a, you know,
they are.
Literally in the sense that they've been in the military, in the British military, and to whatever extent, you know, it's not easy to tell, you know, how cosseted they were while they're in the military, whether they're allowed to, you know, how far they're allowed to get into the front line, and, you know, that kind of thing. But, you know, if you're a major investor in BAE Systems, Bright House, and so on, and you're one of the, if not the biggest landlord in the country, you know, you're responsible for a hell of a lot of death of people.
Oh, for sure.
Knowingly. Right. My last one, and then you can
jump in
and so Charles. So I just got. I'm not sure how far some of this can be verified, but it's too hilarious not to talk about. Apparently, he once shrieked at the sight of an unknown plastic substance covering his dinner, only to be told, "It's cling film, darling," by Camilla. So he's apparently known as an Olympian whinger. See, this is the thing, that they're the most privileged people in the world. They get pampered, like, unbelievably. And yet, Charles is just a petulant little child, like, saying things like, "Even my office is not the right temperature. Why do I have to put up with this? It makes my life so unbearable."
Yeah.
Apparently he's also said, "Nobody knows what utter hell it is to be Prince of Wales." Don't worry, Charles. We'd love to help you out there. So he even brings his own toilet seat with him when he travels. The little pusspot.
Well, this is all ammunition, isn't it? Because when the monarchy does go, I hope that whoever's around makes all these people like do 9-to-5 jobs. Like, I'd love to see Charles working at McDonald's.
I'd have him breaking rocks in the Pennines.
Yeah. You know, and so on and so forth.
Just one of the little, same. Just one of the little tidbit about Charles. He once said that he wished he could live inside Camilla Parker Bowles' trousers as a tampon.
I remember that. Yeah. That's just weird. That's just not even sexual. Weird. That's just like, he's got serious issues. Like, there's got to be some really weird issues there with, like, he wants to be her tampon.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of wish I had more training in psychoanalysis so I could say something about that.
Yeah.
No,
definitely.
Right, and this is literally my last little thing, is Pippa Middleton, Kate's sister. So she was interviewed about health of working class kids. I think she was doing some work with a charity. So they asked for her advice, of course, because, you know, she's clearly an expert in such things. And she had a kind of let them eat cake moment and said that they should eat avocados for breakfast.
What, poor children?
Yeah. And she suggested Bircher muesli with fresh berries as a quick, healthy alternative.
You might as well have just said caviar and champagne.
And then they asked her to describe her most memorable breakfast, and, you know, just to kind of really rub it in, eat shit and die, peasants, I'm living the dream. She said her most memorable breakfast was up a mountain in the Trois-Vallées ski region of France, with beautiful views, snow all around, and crisp, fresh air to heighten the senses. She literally said
I thought she was going to get. I thought I was going to give her a pardon, but now no. Clean toilets with the rest of them.
Yeah, just anyone associated with the royal family is suspect. So that's it for me.
Right, mate. Well, I'll tell you what. What I'm going to do is just move a bit because I'm right near. I'm in a station and I'm right near where the announcements come out. So I'm just going to move so there's no like background noise. Yeah, where I was going to start with was we're talking about, you know, obviously the whole theme of it is arguments against the royals. What I was going to try and do is, you know, try and bring in something from the, I mean, not just the Marxist perspective, but, you know, just to kind of attack it on the level of ideology, really, because I think a lot of the arguments we've been talking about have been about cost. You know, they've been about corruption, how the royals abuse their positions, tourism, things like that. And I think what we've done is we've really convincingly showed there are really no good arguments for the royals. You know, financially, in terms of all the other things they do, we've kind of debunked a lot of the myths, haven't we? The kind of factual myths.
Yeah.
And I think we've done a really good job of doing that. But I think to kind of finish it off nicely, I think, you know, we should really look at the ideology of it all, because really, you know, you've got this group of people in power that are in power partly because of the ruling ideology and how the ruling ideology actually protects them and strengthens their position. So I think if we can understand that ideology a bit more, we can understand maybe how the royals have managed to survive so long, and also, you know, think about ways you can kind of even criticise them more effectively, but also, you know, think about ways in which you could possibly get rid of them, you know. So I think it's about like diagnosing the problem properly to get a proper solution, really. The way I was going to start with it was, well, it's two ways to start, but the way I was going to start with it was we were talking about how to kind of imagine a kind of hypothetical monarchist, right, and how they would argue this. So I think what's really interesting is if you said to say we take a person who's a hypothetical monarchist, they love the royal family, and you throw all these arguments at them. So you say, but look, you know, the royal family don't bring that much money in for tourism. You know, the royal family abuse the duchy funds. You know, the royal family cost 100 million in security a year. So you know, you're kind of throwing these arguments at this hypothetical monarchist person, and they're just going, yeah, but I love the royals. You know, the royals are the fabric of the nation. You know, the royals bring us all together. I think then what you've got to understand is that person is not playing a factual game with you. You know, they're playing an ideological game with you, and I think, you know, you've got to take it to the deeper level, the level of ideology. And I think with anybody who's a monarchist, I mean, I think that's really what's going on here. So when you start looking at the ideology, it is really, like we've said before, it's something that you can attack through capitalism. And we've said before how capitalism and the royals have kind of almost been in a kind of almost teamwork between the two, where one strengthens the other. And we talked a lot about how, you know, through the Middle Ages, moving up into the Victorian ages and things like that, how you saw actually the royals' position has been in a lot of countries undermined by the growth of capitalism. So in France, for example, you know, you've got the French Revolution and you've got the strengthening of the bourgeoisie, and they take on the monarchy basically and undermine it and get rid of it. So you've got that story. So if you look at it in terms of that, you can see kind of where the ideology comes from, where it's going. And I think really that at the moment you've got this, this kind of very close link between the royals and, you know, the kind of capitalist system. And really, to attack the capitalist system is to attack the royals, and vice versa. I think. I mean, I think they're, you know, enmeshed within each other to a large extent. I mean, obviously they are different things, but I think they really are part of the same problem, as it were. And I think if you can see that the royals, criticism of the royals and criticism of capitalism, and how hard it is to criticise capitalism in our current ideological climate, and how hard it is to criticise the royals, you can kind of see how the two do have a kind of dependency or a kind of close relationship there, I think. Yeah, and I think that when capitalism comes down, I think one of the things that I think the royals know this, when capitalism starts to fail, and as Marx says, how, you know, it gradually starts to break down, I think that's a key moment for the royals, because that's when you might see that their power starts to dissolve as well. But anyway, you wanted to jump in.
Well, I was just going to say, Well, two things. First, just to expand on that, is a lot of anti-royalism is just purely, okay, everything else can stay the same, but we'll just not have a monarchy, and we'll still have capitalist democracy for the rich and all the rest of it, and that's fine. I think that's where the lobby group Republic is. So we're not saying that. We're saying the monarchy is totally embedded within the capitalist system, and we need to get rid of them both. We could easily imagine getting rid of the royal family, the monarchy, and everything else stays the same. So, and we're still going to see the same problems. But what I think the other point I wanted to expand on that you're saying there is they embody a fundamental contradiction in capitalism. And that's this, on the one hand, you have this, they kind of lay bare, they expose this contradiction and hypocrisy at the heart of liberalism and the ideology of capitalism, which is this idea that we have a meritocracy and people get where they're meant to be. It's an advance. It's supposed to be an advance from feudalism, where you are what you are, and that's what you are for life, 99.9% of the time. But they do also represent the reality of capitalism, which is that these hierarchies are embedded, and they're not based on merit. They are based on family ties. They're based on ideas of eugenics, racism, and so on. And that's why I think you get like the people who are just purely anti-royal and not really anti anything, anti the deeper structures behind that, capitalism and imperialism. And they're kind of, they're often middle class types that just really, they're expressing a kind of resentment, and their arguments are so easily defeated, And the arguments that they use, often they're using language that's classist and ableist, misogynist, and even snobbish. So, they'll happily call the Queen, an old bitch. They'll happily use misogynistic language towards them. They'll use classist language and call them like scroungers and all that kind of thing. Squatters in Buckingham Palace, and I think a good example of it is that they're obsessed with Harry's paternity, and memes and jokes about who Prince Harry's real father is. Scare quote. It doesn't matter. It's just who cares? Who cares whether Charles is his biological father? It's just not a blind bit of difference to what the debate whatsoever, and they're obsessed with it. And the other thing they're obsessed with is
exactly. I mean,
not only is it irrelevant, it actually perpetuates this kind of discourse about the obsession with the bloodlines. So
exactly. I mean, it distracts, doesn't it, from the problem? Really, it's a distraction in a way.
It's a distraction, but it's also totally undermining your own arguments, because you're saying we're totally against this whole concept of bloodlines and inheritance, and here you are obsessed with
who his father is.
Who his father is. Just doesn't. It's totally contradictory. And the other thing that they're obsessed with is the royal family killing supposedly killing Princess Diana. I have no opinion either way on that. Again, I just don't care.
I don't.
Who cares?
In the scheme of things, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter in the scheme of things.
Because ultimately, I suppose, if it was true, it shows their criminality. But we don't need to know that. We already know that they're criminals. And then this kind of like sanctification of Princess Diana. She's just another one of these blue-blooded leeches. There's nothing to admire about Princess Diana. She did charity work with the charity work it's an alibi, and that shows in her will, where she gave not a penny to charity. She gave her entire fortune, however much it was.
Well, that's another really interesting
20 million
thing,
or something like that. So she just gave it to her sons, who were.
That's a really interesting thing you just said, because we were talking about the kind of relationship between capitalism and monarchy, and what does that remind you of? That reminds you of a very, very rich capitalist, doing loads of charity work to basically promote their business, and then in their will that they leave all the money to their own kids.
Yeah.
I mean that's probably more in America than it is in the UK. But you get these uber capitalists who are obsessed with wealth, and charity is a big way in which they strengthen their brand.
Yeah.
So when
and
the
avoid
Royals
tax
do it,
and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Did you see last week?
Tax breaks. Yeah.
Did you see last week the British businessman who died and left 50 million to the Queen?
No, but
that was last week.
That.
Yeah.
Because that would have really pissed me. That would have ruined my day. Seeing that. Oh my god!
Yeah.
Well, she needs it, doesn't she? She's well, that'll pay for like what, a seventh of the refurbishment cost of Buckingham Palace. That'll build a few walls.
And there's one other thing the kind of middle class anti-royalists go on about, which is the fact that the royal family's German. Which I think it's okay to point that out, like, to people that think that the royal family is, a paragon of Britishness and it's okay to point that out to a degree, but it often strays well into just pure xenophobia. Like,
it's pure xenophobia, yeah. Because the argument there again is the assumption that if they were all British, it'd all be okay.
Yeah,
that's the problem. That's the problem, isn't it?
And they are British. I mean, they are. They have a German background, like you have a German.
True.
background.
But I suppose even if you could trace all of their lines back to the British Isles, it doesn't change that they're still villains, does it? It doesn't.
No, exactly.
It doesn't make a difference.
Well, and actually, it's worse. But and then the other thing is the lizard thing, which I find quite.
The David Icke,
I try and avoid that because it's just it's such a big overlap with like anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and Ross. And stuff, so I mean,
that's quite interesting though, because I think the Icke stuff. I mean, he's obviously wrong about pretty much everything he says, but if you think about it structurally, what he's really saying is that things aren't as they seem. And if you pull the curtains back and look at what's really going on, you've got quite a sinister structure in place. And on that level, okay, he's right, but that's a very vague way in which he's right.
But I actually think he plays a much worse. I mean, he plays a much more negative role in it than that, because what he does is discredit genuine arguments against the rules and such. So he just makes everybody look silly, and just like Alex Jones does. And the thing is that they're actually very much complicit with very far right, sinister kind of groups and ideologies. I don't think Icke is quite as extreme as Alex Jones, but and they also just discredit. And anytime you say anything about the CIA or Britain's secret services, who do nefarious things, like we know that for a fact from history, and when we see evidence of it in present time that we can't actually prove, but there's evidence of it. I avoid that kind of stuff as well, because you just look a bit silly and you look like a conspiracy theorist, and that's their function. That's their function, isn't it?
Well, I mean, this is again why it's good to talk about ideology, isn't it? Because if you understand the ideological level of all of this, and you can talk about class conflicts, and you can talk about base superstructure, all the Marxist concepts, and other people as well who've come up with this, then it just becomes very easy, because then you can analyse it and you can see Alex Jones as a distraction. You can see Icke as a distraction from the actual structure of what's going on. So I think that's why attacking it in terms of ideology is quite useful, because exactly as you say, I mean, you can place these people very, very easily in the debate, can't you? When you see how they reinforce the ideological bias, you can see it very, very easily. Whereas if you didn't think of it in terms of class or ideology, Alex Jones might actually be quite dangerous, because he might actually distort your beliefs. He might distort your, and he is dangerous, because people do listen to him and go, "Shit, Sandy Hook didn't happen."
Jesus,
it's really bad. But if you see him 40 years, which is this kind of ideological trickster, or whatever you want to call it, who is in the service of the right, absolutely, and the establishment, absolutely, then he kind of becomes a joke, which he is.
I mean, I think
he's a dangerous joke.
Yeah, he's really dangerous. And I think a lot of people see him so his support for Trump is kind of you know, he did lose a lot of credibility over that, because it's like, oh wait, everything's a false flag, and prize this gun from my cold dead hands, and all this kind of business. Police and the FBI, they're all fascist stormtroopers. Which is true. And then the next minute, Trump's president, and it's like, oh, actually, police are pretty cool. And he did lose a lot of credibility, but like, I knew one guy that kind of thought that there'd been some kind of, so he was fine before, but now he's bad. Now, you know, he took a wrong turn, and in fact, it wasn't. It was just that what had been there all along actually came to the surface. Anyway,
no, absolutely.
We're straying off topic.
Well, it kind of is ideology, isn't it? Because you can kind of see that point you just made. I mean, you know, you can look at someone and go, well, in terms of ideology, who do they serve? You know, in what direction do their ideas push you, right? And if Alex Jones pushes you towards, you know, Trump, you know, liberalism, whatever you want to call it, then you know what, you know, what his agenda really is. And it's a really good tool for working out what people are up to. Similar, I mean, I hate to drop this, but similar to Jordan Peterson. It's like, if you look at Jordan Peterson and you look at what he really, really says, I mean, it's all so reactionary. It's unbelievable. So ideologically, you know, you can just see the game. You can see what he's doing. I mean, whether he fully knows what he's doing or not is another issue. But all of his stuff on, you know, women in the workplace, it's just all it's all pushing in a reactionary direction, and that's when you know what's going on with him. You can just understand him very, very easily. But anyway, we don't want to get into lobsters and all that kind of stuff.
You know, I got right. Let's come back to this in a minute. I just something that's a bit more lighthearted is a couple of quotes from Prince Philip, because
love this. You love this.
I've got millions of them, but they're so on the money. Like the projection. What he's saying applies to him. So he walked into an East London community centre where there was an Asian women's group. He went up to the volunteers and said, "Who do you sponge off?"
Oh God! Can
you imagine? The biggest sponges in history.
Well, we were saying, weren't we, that Prince Philip, interestingly enough, he has a 400 grand a year grant. And that has never been explained or defended by anybody. It just is there. The Queen has signed it off, and that has been 400 grand a year to him of taxpayers' money, and there's no explanation for it. It's like, how can you justify that?
And they complain about it as well.
They
never think it's enough. Right. I mean, sorry.
No, sorry. I was just going to say, like, you know, we're talking about this the other day. Like, you know, like it goes into a wider issue, but you know. One of the reasons, for which at the moment you could say that, you know, the arguments of the left, the genuine left, aren't really heard because they're silenced by the right. But that's a perfect example. If people knew that Philip got a 400 grand grant out of the taxes, that is a game changer. But it's silenced by the right. You know, the media, whatever you want to call it, the establishment don't let things like that get out. But, you know, it just goes back to what we were saying today. Like, if the left had a genuine platform to say these things, the debate would be very different. But unfortunately, we don't. But anyway, go on to what you were saying.
Yeah, all right. So next one, Buckingham Palace reception for 400 influential British Indians.
Okay. Oh, I know this one. I actually know all of these.
So there's a guy called Atul Patel sitting near him. And clearly there were quite a few people called Patel at this dinner. And Prince Philip leaned over and said, "There's a lot of your family in here tonight," thinking it's hilarious to say that they're all kind of related. Have you seen the range of names in the royal family? I mean, the first names, they don't sort of officially have a surname, but you know, George, Edward, Henry, William. That's it. If you look at aristocrats, like the eldest son will have the same name going back centuries.
Yeah, well, like say, it's projection, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I know it's not the most heinous thing in the world to use similar. Not there's anything particularly wrong with like using the same name for your family or whatever, but it's just, you know.
No, true. I mean, you know, that leads into other things that we go to, like the whole incest thing and the inbreeding. But again, I don't like talking about that because that legitimizes the whole pro-monarchy debate in a way, I think, because it distracts It's a distraction. It's like, who cares if they're incestuous? You know,
Yeah.
obviously it's not what I would recommend. I wouldn't want anyone in my family to be incestuous, but it distracts from the bigger problem, which is that they are vicious, classist, snobbish, imperialist murderers. You know, and that's the problem.
Yeah,
it's not the problem that it's not the problem that Philip and Elizabeth are distant cousins.
No,
that's true. But that's true. But if you go on about that, that becomes the focus. And
exactly.
And we don't want to do that. But anyway, good stuff about Philip. He's got loads.
I've just got a couple more. Right, I've got so many. Right, this is a funny one. At the opening of London City Hall in 2002, he said, "The problem with London is the tourists. They cause the congestion. If we could just stop the tourism, we could stop the congestion."
Oh, wow. Wow. And at the same time, one of the pro-monarchy arguments is they're good for tourism, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
I'm not really. There's some really disgusting ones. I'm not really going for them, but and there's some really racist ones. But right, this is the last one, and this is the funniest for me. In 1967, he was asked if he'd like to visit Russia, and he said, "I would like to go to Russia very much, although the bastards murdered half my family." Yeah, I heard that. Yes, they did, Philip. Good on him.
Yeah.
So that's it.
There was just to add to that, there was a really funny moment. I can't remember when it was. It was a few years ago, and it was after the Good Friday Agreement. And Philip was invited to a thing in Ireland somewhere, and there was an ex-member of the IRA there that had been linked to. Well, obviously the IRA were linked to Mountbatten's death, weren't they? They did it, but Philip had to go as part of the Good Friday.
Was it IRA? It was one of the Republicans.
I might have got that wrong. But anyway, Philip had to go to, because the whole Good Friday thing, they had to put on a good show. So Philip had to go to this dinner. He tried to get out there, and he ended up sitting at a table with all of these guys, these ex-IRA guys or whatever. And
you're right. You're right. It was IRA.
And there's a video of it when they're all shaking hands at the end, and Philip basically just doesn't shake any of these guys' hands and just storms off in a huff because they killed his uncle. But he had to go. You know, he obviously had to go because it's the whole idea of the royal family being like.
He was another paedophile, wasn't he?
Sorry.
He was another paedophile, wasn't he?
He was a paedophile. Yeah, Mountbatten allegedly was. Yeah. In India,
allegedly, I'm not sure how.
It's all allegedly, but apparently in India he procured young boys in India and all sorts of stuff.
3 cheers for the IRA.
Well, there you go.
I mean, you know, if you're taking out a royal and a paedophile in one go,
and an imperialist, you know,
and all the rest of it,
What was he, the ex-governor?
Oh,
of India?
in India, he's rolling. Oh dear, yeah.
Yeah, so he was a good one. That's like taking out the
Viceroy, wasn't he? Yeah.
That's like taking out the boss on Street Fighter, isn't it? The final boss. And then you complete the game if you can.
And the IRA get a bad rep. I mean, Jesus.
Yeah.
Just for that alone, that we should be drinking a toast.
Well, you do probably. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, all these quotes, isn't it? Because you would have thought that he'd have learned to shut up, but he just hasn't.
Yeah. And they literally laugh about it and just describe it as a gaffe. Oh, it's just a gaffe. Oh, it's just, you know. Oh, he's just being disgustingly racist again, isn't it? Isn't it hilarious?
Yeah. It's odd. It's really odd. Because you said, anyway.
Yeah, I was just going to say, should we kind of like wrap up? Have we got any concluding?
Well, yeah.
Statements?
No, I mean that's pretty good actually, because I think we've gone through all of the kind of arguments. We've debunked the arguments for the royal family pretty well, and then we did a bit of a history thing at the beginning, and then we finished off with a bit of ideology, and because I really think it's obviously people coming to this for the first time, you know, they're going to want to read up more. But I think if you attack it on the level of ideology, I think it becomes really interesting. And you can link it to imperialism, past struggle, all the things we've been talking about. It all fits together really nicely if you do that. And also it helps you understand why people are so entrenched.
Yeah.
Because, you know, like we've said before, ideology, it's very hard to defeat it with facts. and logic, because it's deeper than that, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you have to really understand that level of it to kind of get to grips with the problem, I think. One thought I did have about ending it was just maybe a prediction about how it's all going to go, because I think, you know, the Royals are going to be around for a while, but I think eventually it is going to just crumble. I just thought it'd be interesting to get your thoughts on when and how that will happen.
When Prince Charles ascends the throne, put it this way, when Elizabeth dies, the monarchy is going to take a huge hit in terms of popularity. And I think, you know, Charles is very unpopular.
Yeah.
But William and Harry, you know, their popularity is still pretty high, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I think if they want to, you know, save themselves, they're probably going to have to get William in there sooner rather than later. Honestly, I think that the monarchy is here to stay as long as capitalism's here to stay.
Yeah.
And thankfully, capitalism is not here to stay forever. One way or the other, you know, either humanity itself will be wiped out, or civilization as we know it will be wiped out, or the working class rise up, as they have in dozens of countries over the 20th century, take control politically and take control economically, and that's how we're going to get rid of the royals. Is working class takeover, and that's not only is that how we're going to get rid of the royals, that's also how we're going to save the planet, save humanity, and create a society in which we can all thrive, not only survive but thrive. So, you know, it's all linked.
Yeah, definitely, completely agree. I think, you know, as you say, as capitalism gets more and more unstable.
All sounds very easy when you put it like that, but
yeah. That's all we have to do. Yeah, that's all we have to do.
Just, you know,
I think
easy,
it's true.
Easy job, but it's a necessity, and you know, when something must be done, you know, where there's a will, there's a way, and
yeah, I mean, the only counterpoint to that would be, I suppose, well, it's not really a counterpoint. I mean, in Russia, it went really well when they obviously abolished one system and replaced it with another. You know, they got rid of the Tsars and they brought in communism. Well, they brought in socialism. So that could be an equivalent move. What's interesting is in France, you know, they got rid of the monarchy, but they kept capitalism. That's interesting. So
and they brought the monarchy back.
They brought the monarchy back, but then didn't they? But then they got rid of it again. Yeah.
They got rid of it.
So I think, you know, there is an interest. There's lots of ways in which it can kind of go off in different directions. But I think in the UK particularly, there is this unholy alliance between capital and the monarchy. It's so strong. And I think the more you look at it, the more you see it. Basically the royal family are kind of like, you know, almost like entrepreneurs, like business kind of captains for capitalism. You know, they do all the arms deals, they do all the trade. You know, the whole thing with Elizabeth's sister going to America to patch up an economic deal with LBJ. You know, but that was basically about capitalism. You know, keeping capitalism strong by using the royals as a kind of it's
so weird how people do that. Like people I know who are, you know, sort of generally maybe not anti-capitalism, but they, you know, they kind of think banks are greedy and, you know, evil, and somehow the royals like escaped their criticism, and they're like, oh, you know, the problem isn't the royals, it's this, that, and the other. Well, they're totally embedded in it. You can't separate. If you're against Britain selling weapons of mass destruction to countries which actually use them on civilian populations, places like Israel, places like Saudi Arabia, you can't oppose that without the royals have a big responsibility for it as well. So
absolutely. Well, I think that's pretty good. I mean, is there anything else you want to say? Have you covered it all off?
That's it. We nailed it. We've covered everything.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Cheers, mate.
Thanks.
I really had better let you go.
Yeah, I've got to get to work as well, actually.
Right.
But I'll see you in a bit then.
Cheers, mate. I'll speak to you soon anyway.